Everything is too easy after maxing my talents. Chapter 776, 10 Million Scholarship, 2. These two sums of money alone were enough for Li Yueming to cultivate martial arts in the early stages. Apart from that, Principal Longwu also promised to write to his old friend on the Imperial Sun Star to apply for a place for Li Yueming to enter the Imperial Sun Star Military Martial Arts Academy. This was only the tip of the iceberg for the treatment of a genius. Whether it was Planet 7 to 20,003, the Emperor's Sun Star area, or the entire Alliance of Law, the resources for the truly talented young people could basically satisfy all the needs of cultivation. Of course, all of this was on the premise that he could display enough talent and strength to make the Alliance of Order take him seriously. The universe was too big. Just a small planet like Planet 7 to 20,003 alone had a population of hundreds of millions. The number of prodigies born from it was naturally countless. To stand out among such a huge number of people and step on other people of the same age, it was definitely not something that could be done with the word genius. Luck, opportunity, hard work, none of them could be missing. Of course, all of this had nothing to do with Li Yueming. Because he wasn't a genius at all, he was just a cheat player. Cheats were never reasonable or logical. Don't ask, asking is cheating. After that, she came out of the meeting room. Today's class was almost over. Li Yueming didn't stay for too long and took the public transport home. Vice President Wu wanted him to live on campus. After all, not only could he concentrate more on his studies, but he could also get good protection. However, Li Yueming obviously did not agree. Not to mention that if he really exposed his matter, the school would not be able to protect him. He said that he could not explain it to his uncle and aunt at home. Li Linglong's school was closer to her home than Li Yueming's. Therefore, by the time Li Yueming slowly walked home, Li Linglong had already returned for a while. At this moment, she was undergoing toughness stretching and internal training. Li Linglong rarely talked about her dreams to outsiders. She put them into action more quietly. Boarding students would occasionally be dragged to the school for additional training by the teachers. In order to keep up with the progress of his studies, Li Linglong would train for an extra hour or two every day after she went home. Even boys might not be able to endure such high-intensity training. It was hard to imagine how a girl like Li Linglong could endure it without enough nutrition. After hearing Li Yueming's return, he was shocked. Li Linglong turned her head and glanced at him. "My mom has to work overtime today. The food has been prepared at noon and is in the fridge. If you want to eat, go heat it up yourself." Hearing the girl's cold voice, Li Yueming replied, "What about you? You're not eating dinner today." Li Linglong pursed her lips and said without turning her head, "I've been controlling my body fat percentage during this period of time." Looking at the girl's slightly thin back, Li Yueming sighed and didn't say anything. He took out all the food from the refrigerator and heated it in the microwave. About 3 minutes later, the microwave made a crisp ding sound. Li Yueming took out the hot food and placed it on the dining table. He then said, "Come over and eat some. I won a scholarship today. It will be distributed in a day or two. By then, our family won't be short of money." The girl's daily living expenses were even less than his. Although she was young, she did need less nutrition and energy. But in the end, he could only barely guarantee that he would not go hungry. Now, the reason why Li Linglong said that she would not eat at night was that the so-called control of body fat percentage was naturally a lie that could not be faked. The truth was that Li Yueming was about to take the military college examination. Li Linglong didn't want her parents to bear more pressure, but she also wanted him to eat more. That was why he lied and said he wasn't hungry. She had always been like this. Although she said she was fierce, she was actually kinder than anyone else. Hearing Li Yueming's words, Li Linglong rolled her eyes and said unhappily, "How much scholarship can a rank 1 martial artist like you get? It might not even be enough to buy 2 nutrient fluids, so how could he not be short of money? Let's finish the exam first. If we don't pass, we might be able to find a job. Becoming a level 1 martial artist naturally came with subsidies. However, compared to the huge expenses required on the martial arts path, this subsidy could only be considered a drop in the bucket. However, compared to ordinary people, level 1 martial artists were still popular. As long as Li Yueming was willing, he could find a job on Planet 7 to 20,003 with a monthly salary of tens of thousands without any pressure. However, Li Yueming was still a student, and he had not completed the military academy assessment. It was basically impossible to change his family's financial situation through the identity of a level 1 martial artist in a short period of time. Li Linglong still had no intention of coming over for dinner. Li Yueming had no choice but to take the initiative and say, "Ah, it's indeed not much. It's about 10 million universe credits." Li Linglong, who was leaning against the wall and stretching her legs, stiffened when she heard this. After a moment, she turned around and sized up Li Yueming. She said in disbelief, "How much did you say?" Obviously, she thought that there was something wrong with her hearing just now. 10 million universe credits per year. Li Yueming's voice was very soft, and his tone was as if he was asking, "Have you eaten?" After hearing the amount again and confirming that she had not heard wrongly, Li Linglong's eyes instantly widened. Her thin and fair face puffed up like a bun. 10 million universe dollars? Really? What did you do? Li Yueming spread his hands and smiled. "I didn't do anything. It's just that the school thinks that I'm talented and will definitely become a figure in the future, so they applied for this scholarship for me. Also, it's not a total of 10 million, but 10 million a year. When this money arrives, I'll buy a big house for uncle and auntie and find them an easy job. Nutrient fluids, nutrient solutions, and so on, none of them will be a problem." Li Linglong was stunned. She still couldn't believe it. However, looking at Li Yueming's serious face, he didn't seem to be joking with her. So, was it really a scholarship of 10 million yuan? And 10 million a year? After being stunned for a while, Li Linglong's eyes suddenly turned red. She said with a trembling voice, "You're saying that is that true?" "Of course." Li Yueming nodded. His uncle and auntie treated him well. Although his cousin was unforgiving with her words, she still treated him as a family member in her heart. His predecessor could not repay this kindness in time, but he was different. Although this sum of money was not much, it was definitely a terrifying windfall for this working family that was not well off. Li Linglong had been holding back her tears. However, she could no longer hold it in, and countless crystal-clear tears rolled down her face. Seeing this situation, Li Yueming's expression softened a lot. He said, "All right, don't cry. I won't let you suffer any more in the future. Come and eat. You're almost starving like a sick cat, yet you're still trying to be brave." Li Linglong wiped her tears. As she wiped, her snot was still bubbling. At this moment, she was really no different from a crying cat. She finally suppressed the grievance in her heart. Li Linglong turned her face away and said, "Humph, I hope you're not lying to me. Otherwise, you know the consequences." As she spoke, she gestured with her small fists and said fiercely, "I'm almost a level 1 warrior. If you dare to lie to me, I'll beat you up." Although Li Linglong's expression was not much different from usual. However, coupled with this multicolored cat face, the deterrence was undoubtedly reduced by several levels. Li Yueming couldn't help but laugh. "Tisk, you're just a little girl. You won't be able to touch me even if you train for the rest of your life. Who are you calling a young girl?" Li Linglong was flustered and exasperated. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws as she rushed over. The siblings played around. They were all in a much better mood. Chapter 777, Special Referrer Assessment, _1. The world was lonely, the mountains and rivers were vast. There were so many living beings living in the universe, but they were still unable to fill the boundless starry sky. Looking at the curtain of stars hanging high above his head, Li Yueming sighed in his heart. Uncle and aunt had already returned from work. Li Yueming and Li Linglong did not tell them about the scholarship. He wanted to give them a surprise after the money was transferred to his account. After closing his eyes to enjoy his leisure time, Li Yueming once again focused on studying the two plans. To him, the third cultivation plan of the mighty power practitioner was an absolute gift to him. Whether it was to enhance one's martial arts experience or to advance to a higher level of martial artists, one could not avoid a deep understanding of this plan. Li Yueming was naturally unwilling to let go of any time to study such an important foundation. There were only 13 days left before the military college assessment. Although Li Yueming was only a level 1 martial artist, with his current combat strength, passing the basic assessment would not be a problem. Therefore, compared to the almost guaranteed military academy assessment, what Li Yueming needed to pay more attention to was actually the implementation of the special recommendation quota. This afternoon, many leaders of the Starry Sky Martial Arts School had already decided to report Li Yueming's name to the Military Affairs Committee. However, there were close to 1 million outstanding students among the 30-plus famous schools on Planet 7 to 20,003. Even these famous schools could only submit one special recommendation quota. In total, there were only dozens of referees. There were at most 5 spots for special referees, and a few of the 5 spots on Planet 7 to 20,003 were often cut. In other words, it was already very good for 3 out of more than 30 students to be selected. In order to stand out from this group of carefully selected geniuses, each person who obtained a special recommendation had to have an absolute advantage over the other ordinary geniuses. Only by doing so would he be recognized. For the sake of fairness, in order to not let a genius go and not choose a wrong person, the military committee would set up a special assessment for the special referees every year before the start of the military academy assessment. The goal was to select the best students from the outstanding students of the various academies. He also provided them with the best cultivation conditions. During this process, the garrison commander and deputy commander of the military committee of Planet 7 to 20,003 who had the authority of special referees would take time to personally arrive at the scene. According to the performance of the students, they would consider whether they needed to use their authority to open an internal passage for the geniuses. It could be said that compared to the military college exam, where the passing rate was as high as 1/3, the special referees exam was the high-end exam that attracted the most attention from the younger generation of Planet 7 to 20,003. Even during the final revision period, when time was the most pressing, the major martial arts schools would still organize students to watch the battle during the start of the special referees assessment. Especially the graduates from the same batch. It was also a chance to watch the battle from the closest distance. It was to let the students know that there was always someone better than them. It was also to allow the students to accumulate more combat experience. After all, the focus of martial arts was always actual combat, and the end point of actual combat was the insect tide that threatened the entire universe of order. The Starry Sky Martial Academy didn't have any young geniuses who could shoulder the banner this year. The school leaders had already argued about this many times during this period of time. This was also the reason why Li Yueming was able to easily obtain a recommendation spot when he had just displayed his powerful combat strength. But even so, the school leaders still reminded him repeatedly that he had to be extremely cautious during the assessment. After all, most of the geniuses of the same age who stood at the top of the other academies had already become level 2 martial artists. Li Yueming was only a level 1 martial artist now, so he might not be able to gain much advantage in the assessment. Therefore, for safety's sake, my fellow countrymen, Li Yueming was ready to break through as soon as possible and become a level 2 warrior. In the following period of time, Li Yueming continued to absorb and consolidate his martial arts cultivation. The star and moon arts that he had spent on reincarnating points to replenish were also showing great effects. If the third cultivation method for personal mighty power practitioners was a top-notch martial arts cultivation method, then the star moon art that Li Yueming had painstakingly developed and improved was the most common top-notch cultivation method. The effect of the combination of the two was far greater than the increase brought by cultivating one of them alone. The martial Dao Qi in his body, which reflected the strength of a martial artist, was also increasing at an extremely rapid speed. It seemed to change every day. A week passed in the blink of an eye. On the third day after the discussion with the school leaders, the 10 million scholarship promised to Li Yueming was announced. It had to be said that the Starry Sky Martial Academy was very generous in this aspect. After all, this was actually an extremely cost-effective investment for the school. The only thing that troubled the school was not the large amount of money invested, but the lack of students worthy of their money. If Li Yueming could successfully display his talents, these investments would return to the school thousands of times in the future. That night, Li Yueming went to the Federal Bank to withdraw 5 million yuan. Chapter 778, Special Referrer Assessment, _2. When the money was placed on the dining table, the uncle and aunt's brains turned off. Looking at the white banknotes on the table, she didn't know what to say. For working-class families like them, a scholarship of 10 million yuan was basically an unimaginable amount in their lifetime. But now, such a huge amount of wealth that they did not even dare to dream of was right in front of them. This kind of direct shock was something that no one could describe unless they experienced it personally. When he finally came back to his senses, the uncle immediately got up and locked the door. He turned to look at Li Yueming and said with a serious expression, "Where did this money come from? You didn't do anything illegal, right?" Li Yueming smiled. But before he could say anything, Li Linglong wrinkled her nose and said, "Dad, what are you talking about? We are all outstanding young men with a bright future. Who would be stupid enough to make money by breaking the law?" He saw that his father's expression was still a little suspicious. It was obvious that he didn't believe it. After all, both Li Linglong and Li Yueming were just a group of students who had just come of age. Now that he had suddenly taken out so much money, he could not think of any other plan other than breaking the law. Li Linglong kept him in suspense for a while. Seeing that his father, who had always been good-tempered, was really anxious, he hurriedly said, Don't. I've already inquired about Brother Shi's scholarship. He was awarded a special recommendation spot by the Starry Sky Aristocrat Martial Arts School because of his excellent combat results. This 10 million scholarship is just a bonus." Hearing Li Linglong's answer, this time, not to mention the uncle, even the aunt fell into a daze. Didn't they know about Li Yueming's results? Although he was not at the bottom of the class. However, he had only been able to barely keep up with the school's progress. He was about to take the military academy exam and barely broke through to level 1 martial artist. How could he have received so many huge scholarship awards? Everyone's eyes were on him. "Don't look at me. I'm not too sure myself." Li Yueming smiled. At this point, he scratched his head and continued to play dumb. Maybe it's because I have a thorough understanding of martial arts techniques? During this actual combat training, one person defeated 9 other students who were level 1 martial artists practitioners. Then, the principal and the vice principal held my hand and told me that I was a martial arts genius. Afraid that his uncle and aunt wouldn't believe him, Li Yueming was about to pass the video file in his pocket to them. After all, Uncle and Auntie had been down to earth for their entire lives and had never hoped for anything beyond their abilities. If they did not explain the origin of the money in front of them, with Uncle and Auntie's personalities, they might not even be able to sleep soundly. However, he did not expect his uncle to accept it faster than he had imagined. He held Li Yueming's hand and said in relief, as expected of the son of our Li family. "He's even more outstanding than your father when he was young." At this point, the uncle's voice suddenly paused as if he had recalled some bad memories. After a moment, he sighed heavily and said, "Sigh. Let's not talk about this. This money is sponsored by the school. Uncle and auntie can't take it. It just so happens that you're going to take the exam too. Go buy more nutrient fluids and supplements to nourish your body. Uncle is useless. It's been hard on you all these years. Beside him, Li Linglong obviously liked to hear these words, but she pursed her lips and did not say anything, which was rare. Li Yueming had already guessed that his uncle would decline. However, it was obvious that Li Yueming could not monopolize the money, so he said directly, "Uncle, the school's scholarship is 10 million yuan. I only took out 5 million yuan here to buy nutrient fluids and supplements. The remaining 5 million yuan is more than enough. Besides, I'm a genius now. The scholarship will only increase year by year in the future. Don't worry." As she spoke, Li Yu did not give them a chance to refuse. After giving Li Linglong a look, he decided, "All right, it's settled then. Uncle, auntie, even if you don't think for yourself, you have to think for Linglong. Her talent has always been much better than mine, but she lacks some resources. Now that she had this sum of money, she might be able to become one of the best in the academy." Seeing this, Li Linglong also raised her head and said, "Humph! Dad, Mom, you guys are thin-skinned, but I'm thick-skinned. If you don't want it, I'll take it myself." The two of them echoed each other. After thinking about it, uncle and aunt did not act pretentious anymore. They nodded and said, "We are one family, so let's not talk nonsense. Since Yueming has made such an arrangement, your uncle and I naturally have no reason to object. We're already old. It's indeed time for us to change our mindset and keep up with the pace of you young people." The uncle was even happier. He patted Li Yueming's shoulder and said happily, "It just so happens that uncle has also received his salary today. In order to celebrate the birth of a martial arts genius in our family, let's go. I'll bring you guys to a restaurant outside to eat and drink." The usually thrifty auntie also smiled at this moment. "Don't just think about that lousy wine of yours. You have to buy some supplements for our two precious babies." Hearing this, the arrogant uncle scratched his head awkwardly. In an instant, he was beaten back to his original state. The few of them looked at each other and smiled. They were all in a very happy mood. He had endured so many days without money. Although he was living in poverty, he was still quite happy. Although they had earned a huge sum of money now, the uncle and aunt only wanted to go out and cook a good meal to celebrate. After eating and drinking, he bought nearly 500,000 yuan worth of nutrient fluids and nutrient cream for Li Yueming and Li Linglong. The few of them then returned the way they came. To be honest, Li Yueming really liked this kind of family atmosphere. If it was possible, it would not be bad to just get married and have children and live an ordinary life. Unfortunately, this was beyond Li Yueming's reach. Not to mention the fact that Li Yueming himself shouldered a responsibility that would not allow him to be half-hearted, just the initial deduction of the invasion war that would suddenly appear more than 40 years later. If Li Yueming did not improve himself and prepare well, all life and material energy, including Planet 7 to 20,003 and the Imperial Sun Galaxy, would become nutrients for the Zerg. The happiness in front of him was naturally like a bubble under the sun, shattering at the touch. Nothing in the world could be perfect, and precious things were precious precisely because they could not be owned for a long time. The only way Li Yueming could do it was to cherish every single day that she could stay with her uncle, aunt, and cousin. As for what happened after that, he would only be qualified to consider it after he had enough power and strength. A week later, the Military Affairs Committee organized a special recommendation assessment. Li Yueming had already touched the threshold of a level 2 warrior. If he wanted to, he could become a level 2 warrior anytime. However, Li Yueming did not do so. After all, he had just become a Class 1 martial artist a while ago. It had only been a short while, and he had already advanced to Class 2 city martial artist. Such a terrifying advancement speed was not something that could be explained by the heavens. If martial arts techniques could be explained by terms like intuition and innate, then the level of martial arts could only be improved through years of training and accumulation. Only a very small number of geniuses could have a flash of inspiration in the process of life and death combat or painstaking study, but this still could not be separated from the daily accumulation of polishing. For someone like Li Yueming, who broke through a few days after becoming a level 1 martial artist, it was not unprecedented in the entire universe, but it also went against the common sense of the ordinary people on the path of martial arts. Under such circumstances, Li Yueming's rash breakthrough to level 2 martial artist might attract unnecessary attention. Of course, this was not the main reason. After all, Li Yueming had already made up his mind to create a genius persona. So what if it was against common sense? Genius itself was a term that defied common sense. Even if it caused the outside world to be shocked and spy on him, Li Yueming was confident that he could resolve it one by one. The main reason was that Li Yueming felt that his understanding of level 1 martial artists was not comprehensive enough. Although the advancement did not affect him much, it was still a little uncomfortable. This was obviously unacceptable to Li Yueming, who pursued perfection and couldn't tolerate sand in his eyes. Therefore, after considering both aspects, Li Yueming gave up on breaking through immediately. Instead, he chose to continue training for a while and consider it after his body was perfect. Even if something unexpected happened during the special recommendation assessment, the worst that could happen was to perform a scene similar to a breakthrough in front of everyone. Chapter 779, Test, Terrifying Martial Arts Techniques, _1. The Alliance of Order, Year 7433 of the Fourth Era, August 28. This was originally an ordinary day in the universe, but the Alliance of Order gave it a unique meaning. For many young people in the martial arts world of the Third Universe, today was the final warm-up before the start of the military college assessment. And for the few geniuses who were recommended by the martial arts school, today was a stage specially built for them to shine. That's right, today was the day of the selection of the special referees within the military committee. The young geniuses who could stand out in this grand examination had a high probability of obtaining the favor of the military committee's planetary level higher UPS. From then on, they would lead a life completely different from ordinary geniuses. Whether it was resources or treatment, there would be a huge difference between geniuses who were recommended by special referees and those who were not. It was precisely because of the huge gap between the two that the various academies and countless geniuses were even more determined to obtain this spot. If it wasn't for the military committee, the Alliance of Order, which strictly prohibited candidates from taking the interplanetary exams, all the geniuses in the universe would probably go to a remote planet like 7 to 20,003 just to get a spot. Of course, none of this had much to do with Li Yueming. Anyway, no matter how difficult it was, he was determined to get this spot. 7 to 20,003 There weren't many schools on this planet that were qualified to recommend geniuses. In addition, they were selected from other channels. There were a total of 36 students participating in the special referees assessment. Compared to previous years, this number was actually on the high side. More than 30 people were competing for 3 spots, and each of them had to surpass the other 12. The number 12 to 1 didn't sound that scary. But don't forget that the young man who could stand here was already 1 in 10,000. The current assessment was equivalent to cutting off another 1 in 12 probability among the 1 in 10,000. The pressure and the value of the gold could be seen from this. This time, the venue for the assessment of the special referees quota was set up in the Montenegro City Martial Arts Gym next to the Starry Sky Martial Arts School. In order to welcome the arrival of the Commander-in-Chief and the 2 Deputy Commanders-in-Chief of the Military Affairs Committee, as well as the area to accommodate the spectators from other martial arts schools, the interior of the huge martial arts dojo had basically been emptied. Despite this, there were still many people who did not have seats. They could only stand far away from the stadium and watch, judging the results by listening to the sounds inside. Even those who had made reservations in advance were unable to squeeze into the core area. One could imagine how many spectators there were. It couldn't be helped. The special referee's assessment over the years was already a rare embellishment in the boring lives of the people under military management. This was especially true on Planet 7 to 20,003, which had no other pillar industries to drive economic development other than the military manufacturing industry. When Li Yueming and the other opponents came to the stage one after another, they couldn't help but be speechless when they saw the black crowd in the stadium. He knew that participating in this assessment would definitely attract attention, but he did not expect it to be so eye-catching. As Li Yueming's family members, his uncle, aunt, and Li Linglong were naturally invited over. Moreover, they were sitting in the core area at the front of the stands. Therefore, even among so many spectators, Li Yueming could see the three of them at a glance. "Brother, you can do it." This voice belonged to Li Linglong. This little girl who had a sharp tongue actually called him brother for the first time today. It was really as if the sun had risen from the west. "Xiaoyu, you can do it. Yueming, the Li family is proud of you." This was uncle and aunties. It was hard for uncle to be so loud at such an old age. Even the surrounding group of martial artists could not compare to his voice. Li Yueming couldn't help but smile. Life was really wonderful. Before he started this reincarnation, he never thought that he could have such a happy family in this life. It was precisely because of this that the responsibility on his shoulders felt heavier. After a moment of absent-mindedness, Li Yueming finally came to his senses. He focused his mind and extracted the rules of the special referee's assessment from the memory fragments. According to the annual practice, if nothing went wrong, the special referer assessment would be divided into 3 rounds. The first round was a demonstration of basic martial arts techniques. Its purpose was to test the physical condition of the examinees. All the qualified young people entered the training platform specially set up by the examinees. They wore physical shackles specially made by the military committee to limit their physical fitness to the same level. What the examinees needed to do was to complete the 3 tests of strength, speed, and reaction ability through the martial arts techniques they had learned and mastered while limiting their physical fitness. This assessment had a total of 100 points. The passing score was 80 points. Under normal circumstances, if a candidate could get more than 80 points, they would be considered outstanding. The second test was a demonstration of martial arts moves, testing the talents and standards of these so-called geniuses. The examiners would set up a few mechanical puppets controlled by AI. As long as the examinee could use any weapon and the corresponding move to defeat them, they could pass the test. The total score for this assessment was also 100 points, and the passing score was also 60 points. Chapter 780, Test, Terrifying Martial Arts Techniques, _2. As for the final test, it was undoubtedly a practical test between students. Only candidates with a total score of more than 150 points in the first 2 assessments would be qualified to participate in the final assessment. These candidates would be banished to the Great Forest Combat Practice Grounds. Each candidate was worth 20 points. What the examinees needed to do was to eliminate others to obtain points while ensuring that they were not eliminated. Until all the competitors were eliminated. Contestant will obtain a maximum of 200 points based on the number of points. After the completion of the above 3 assessments, the special candidate quota would be given to the top 5 students. In other words, in order to be qualified for internal recommendation, the students who were referred to had to be extremely competent in every subject. Even if he wasn't particularly outstanding, he definitely couldn't pull him down too much. Otherwise, he might not even be qualified to participate in the final round of the assessment. The most noteworthy one was the final combat assessment. Apart from the total score of 200, it was also the best stage to gain the attention of the military council's commander-in-chief and deputy commander-in-chief. After all, the commander-in-chief and deputy commander-in-chief were very busy and had limited time. Unless there were a few special circumstances, the annual special referees assessment would only be held at the beginning of the final combat assessment. They basically wouldn't pay special attention to the first two assessments. Therefore, even if the examinees' scores for the first few tests were flawed, as long as they could display superior strength in the final battle, they could rely on this to obtain a counterattack. After all, the ultimate goal of cultivating martial arts was unparalleled combat strength. Of course, the actual combat assessment was the most valuable part of the martial arts assessment process. After repeatedly clearing the messy memory fragments in his mind and making sure that he didn't miss anything, Li Yueming's eyes became clear. At this moment, the 36 genius students recommended by the famous universities on Planet 7 to 20,003 had been assembled. Except for Li Yueming, almost all the students were nervous. After all, this was a life and death trial for them. If they made it through and obtained the qualification to recommend the candidates, they would have a bright future ahead of them. In the future, they might even be able to glorify their ancestors and become the legends of the universe. If they couldn't, they were still geniuses even though they were on the remote planet 7 to 20,003. However, once they passed the military committee's assessment and left planet 7 to 20,003 for the Emperor Yang star field, they would only be considered mediocre in the vast universe where geniuses were everywhere. This was the cruel reality that every young man in a remote starfield had to face. If he wanted to get rid of his own small place and become a star domain level or even universe level warrior, he would have to grit his teeth and work hard. Even if he had to squeeze out all the potential in his body, he would have to rush forward without caring about anything else. He rushed as far as he could. Falling halfway meant that he had fallen from the top echelon and was likely to never recover. As more and more higher UPS arrived, the atmosphere in Montenegro City's martial arts gym became more and more lively. However, most of the genius students on the stage were not excited. Instead, they were all tense. Even from afar, one could feel the nervous aura on their bodies. Only a few students like Li Yueming who had full confidence in themselves were more natural. At the very least, he did not cower in front of everyone. On the management platform at the top of the martial arts hall, a white-haired old man took a sip of amber wine and said to another middle-aged man in his 50s with interest, "Who do you think will win?" "I'm done." The middle-aged man in his 50s was muscular, and his arms were much thicker than an average person's calves. He truly lived up to the old proverb from an unknown planet, "A horse can ride on his arms." At this moment, when he heard the old man's question, the middle-aged man's eyes swept across the students below the stage without leaving a trace. His gaze finally landed on Li Yueming. After staring at him for a long time, he said, "I don't gamble, I advise you to bet less. Also, I forgot to tell you that Evelyn is a very narrow-minded woman. She hates two kinds of people the most in her life. One is a gambler, and the other is an alcoholic, and you seem to have both. If you don't want to be targeted by her, I advise you to restrain yourself." The white-haired old man was originally very satisfied with his wine cup, but when he heard this, he was stunned. After a moment, he smiled and said, "Leon, don't be so nervous. You know, there's nothing fun on this broken little planet. I'm old and can't indulge in women. If I don't drink or gamble, do I have to lie down and sleep every day?" The middle-aged man called Leon snorted coldly and looked at Li Yueming again. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "I think that young man will win. What do you want to bet on?" Looking at the honest Leon in front of him, the white-haired old man was completely stunned. After a long time, he became angry and said, "You're even more despicable than a gambler. I'm not betting with you anymore." Leon did not speak. He just closed his eyes in silence. The old man suddenly felt a little bored. After hesitating for a moment, he put away all the wine glasses and playing cards on the table. The two people in front of him were the two deputy commanders of the Alliance of Law stationed on Planet 7 to 20,003. As they sat down, the first round of assessment for the students under their feet finally began. The first test was a demonstration of basic martial arts techniques. The head examiner distributed and put on the physical shackles for the 36 examinees. This thing was similar to the shackles of imprisonment. Even a level 4 martial artist would find it difficult to break free after wearing it. Li Yueming didn't believe it and tried to break free. He realized that even he couldn't break free from this chain without using his full strength. It was more than enough to restrict a group of students whose average level was less than 2 levels. After wearing the physical chain, all examinees' physical fitness would be restricted to the same level. Under such circumstances, the students who had the most thorough understanding of martial arts techniques were naturally able to unleash a lot more physical strength than those students who had not thoroughly studied martial arts techniques. Moreover, this kind of display was very intuitive and would not be disturbed by other factors. The so-called martial arts technique was the degree of control a martial artist had over every inch of their body. For example, if the same students threw punches, their postures would be more perfect, and their strength control would be more abundant. Another example was that students who had a better understanding of their body structure would naturally be able to run faster after running a lap. This was the martial arts technique and had nothing to do with anything else. Perhaps to the other examinees, this could be considered the fairest of the few exams. After all the physical conditions and martial arts levels of the students who wore the physical shackles were the same. It was purely their understanding of martial arts, and there was no other difference. However, to Li Yueming, this exam was a bit too much of a bully. After all, although he was only a teenage student on the surface, as a reincarnator, he had actually transmigrated to several worlds of the personal power side and spent hundreds and thousands of years in them. His martial arts skills had basically been honed to the extreme. In order to pursue perfection, he had even given up on being a human. Through the perfect genetic body, he had deduced all kinds of final battle forms. Under such circumstances, letting a group of 17 or 18-year-old students stand on the same starting line as him was no different from an egg hitting a rock. Even if Li Yueming released 1,000 tons of water, it would be enough to drown all the students participating in the assessment. Just as Li Yueming was at a loss whether to laugh or cry, the referee had already finished reading the rules of the exam and officially blew the whistle to start the competition. The first round of the basic exam had officially begun. A sandbag that was taller than a person appeared in front of Li Yueming and the other examinees. There was a metal display screen at the top of the sandbag with the words 0 kg written on it. The students had 3 chances to use all their strength to shake the sandbag. The metal display screen would record the weight of the 3 hits, which would become part of the students' assessment results. The noisy audience quieted down and stared at the examination hall. To be precise, they were staring at the metal display screen in front of the examinees. Even though this was only the appetizer of the special referee's exam. However, according to the usual practice of the past years, whether or not there was a true genius among this group of students could be seen with just one punch. Chapter 781, A single punch shocked everyone, _1. The huge sandbag attracted the attention of the audience. Every year, there would occasionally be some geniuses who would appear in the special referee's examination. Therefore, the audience was very curious as to whether this year would bring them some surprises like in the past. Bang! A heavy blow sounded. A young man with a tender face but a firm gaze suddenly waved his fist and hit the sandbag. The electronic display in the middle flashed quickly and finally jumped out with the number 302 kg. Because he was the first student to step out and start the official examination, almost everyone's eyes instantly gathered on him. The young man did not care about the gazes around him. He punched 3 more times in a row, and the numbers 288 kg and 311 kg popped up respectively. The surrounding audience instantly boiled over, especially the graduates who were about to take part in the military committee assessment this year. They were all stunned. 3 punches with a total of 900 kilograms under the condition that my physical fitness is limited. F***ck, my 3 punches added up to barely 900 kilograms without any physical limitations. Is this what a genius is? This is F***ing ridiculous. If we look at age, he is about the same age as me. This is the first time I feel that I am so useless. How did he manage to become a man of the name? According to the rules, they have already restricted their martial arts physique. Their current physical fitness should be no different from that of an ordinary person. I don't know. Maybe it's because his technique is different from ours. A group of students chattered and discussed. Her small eyes were filled with shock. Only those of the same age as them could feel the greatness of these 900 kilograms. There were many students who couldn't do it even if their physical fitness wasn't restricted. However, he was able to do it casually under the condition that his physical fitness was restricted. What if there were no restrictions? Of course, there were also many old foxes who scoffed at this. What do you guys know? This is the special referrer assessment. 3 punches weighing 900 kilograms can only be considered average. I'm afraid you guys haven't seen a real genius yet. That's right, 900 kilograms isn't considered the worst among the special referees in the past, but it's definitely not considered powerful either. If I remember correctly, among the students from the previous batch, there were a few who broke 1,000 with 3 punches. According to historical records, 3 years ago, there was a genius whose 3 punches were close to 1,500 kilograms. Let me remind you, this place is a stage for geniuses. Everyone who can stand on it is a monster. We ordinary people should not compare ourselves with others. It is easy to break our Dao hearts. After the young man finished his 3 punches, he was obviously not very satisfied. If he hadn't been distracted by the sudden attention of the audience, the explosive force of the second punch should have been able to reach more than 300 kilograms. It wasn't just 288 kilograms. However, an assessment was an assessment. There were no ifs. His results had already been set the moment he threw 3 consecutive punches. After he finished the assessment, the other students who were still preparing began to punch one after another. For a time, the sound of bang 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 rang out continuously. The display screen on the sandbag kept popping up with numbers, 256 kg, 355 kg, 404 kg. It was just as those old foxes had said. In front of this group of geniuses, 3 punches weighing 900 kilograms could only be considered average. Not to mention the others, after such a short while, there were already a few students who could break more than 400 kilograms with a single punch. A moment later, most of the students had finished their assessment. Currently, the person with the highest strength in the 3 punches was a burly man. His total score was 1,466 kilograms, nearly 200 kilograms more than the second place. He could be considered to be the best among the others. After all, it was more difficult to increase the limit of one's strength. After exceeding 1,200 kilograms, which was the limit of an ordinary person's body, it was not easy to increase it by more than 100 kilograms. Another few minutes passed, and most of the students had already completed the first round of assessment. However, it was a pity that the highest among this batch of students had barely reached 1,350 kilograms. For the time being, there were no students who could exceed the limit of 1,466 kilograms. The muscular student waved his arms and declared to the audience that he was the undisputed overlord in terms of strength. The surrounding audience was also very respectful. There was a burst of enthusiastic cheers, which was considered as an exclusive reward for the winner. Not far away, the teacher who blew the whistle looked at his watch and said to Li Yueming, who was still not moving, "Kid, there are only 3 minutes left until the end of the assessment. Are you sure you don't want to warm up?" Other than Li Yueming, there were 2 or 3 other students who had yet to start the assessment. However, most of the students were warming up on the spot. It was obvious that they were prepared to stimulate all the activity in their bodies before going all out to fight. This was allowed by the exam rules. After all, warming up to stimulate the body's activity was also considered a part of martial arts skills. As long as it was completed within the stipulated time limit, it would be fine. Li Yueming was the only one who stood rooted to the ground, neither warming up nor taking the test. Naturally, it attracted the attention of the examiners. Chapter 782, A single punch shocked everyone, _2. Li Yueming smiled. Wait a little longer. The more pressure I'm under, the more power I'll unleash. I'm just trying to stimulate you. The examiner was speechless. All right, it's good that you're happy. After saying that, he ignored Li Yueming and turned his gaze to the other students. Meanwhile, Li Yueming stood at the same spot and waited calmly. He silently watched the assessment time pass by on the display screen. On the spectator stand, most of the students had already finished their assessment, but Li Yueming was still standing there as if nothing had happened. Uncle, Auntie, and Li Linglong were a little anxious. After all, under normal circumstances, it would take some time for him to throw 3 punches in a row. Only by stopping and taking a breath after every punch could he ensure that every punch was above the standard line. In other words, it would take at least a minute to throw 3 punches. Now, Li Yueming only had less than 2 minutes left in the assessment. Even the other warm-up contestants had already made their first punch, but he had not made any moves. Could it be that he had given up because he saw that the difficulty was too high? This wasn't Li Yueming's style. Uncle and aunt were puzzled. Li Linglong could not help but say loudly, "Hey, hey, hey, even if it doesn't work, at least try. I've bragged about it in school. Many students are watching now. If you don't punch me and get eliminated from the bottom, I'll be so embarrassed." The surrounding audience also noticed Li Yueming. There was nothing he could do. Among the anxious students, he was considered an anomaly. At first, it was fine if he was not noticed because there were too many people. Now that the assessment was almost over, he was the only one who did not warm up or punch. He was simply trying to buy time. How could it not be eye-catching? For a time, many people in the spectator area started whispering. Is this guy really scared and doesn't dare to punch? Who knows? There had been many unexpected situations in the past, but this student was so strange. This is the first time I've seen it. Which school recommended this student? Look at the school uniform, he seems to be from the Starry Sky Martial Arts School. He doesn't even have the courage to try. How can he be considered a genius? The Starry Sky Martial Arts Academy was considered a well-known school and had achieved quite a few results in the past. Why did they choose such a weak student this time? I heard that the Starry Sky Martial Academy is lacking in talent this year. I didn't expect it to be so lacking. Even such a poor student was sent over as a genius. I don't know if it's a slap to the face of the military committee or the face of our own school. I originally planned to send my child to the Starry Sky Martial Arts Academy to study, but looking at it now, I think I'll forget about it. The assessment time ticked by. There was less than 30 seconds left before the end. The people who had high hopes for Li Yueming shook their heads. If they had thought that Li Yueming was deliberately keeping them in suspense and wanted to fight hard to earn enough attention, then they were all completely disappointed now. There were less than 30 seconds left before the end of the assessment. Even if Li Yueming really woke up, it was already too late. The remaining time was not enough for him to throw 3 punches. Without a result, no matter how outstanding Li Yueming's performance was, it was destined to be difficult to catch up with the gap. On the spectator stand at the top of the martial arts hall, which was specially built for the senior members of the military committee, the white-haired old man looked at Li Yueming at his feet and suddenly said, "Leon, do we still keep our bet?" Liang glanced at Li Yueming at his feet and said, "What do you want to bet?" The white-haired old man tilted his head and thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "Let's bet on whether he can punch in this round of assessment and whether his total score can exceed 1,000 kilograms. Both of them were experienced in martial arts, so they could see Li Yueming's uniqueness with just a glance. It was because of this that the white-haired old man felt bored when Leon said that he was optimistic about Li Yueming. After all, everyone knew the result. What was the point of blocking it? However, there were only 15 seconds left before the end of the game, but Li Yueming still did not move. Now that the white-haired old man brought up the old matter again, it obviously added a lot of uncertainty to the game. For people at their level, uncertainty meant interest. Leon pondered for a moment and nodded. Sure, I bet that he can pass 1,000 kilograms, but I don't have much money. Before he could finish his sentence, the white-haired elder interrupted, it doesn't matter what the bet is. The old man has lived to this age and likes to look for excitement, so I bet he can't. As the two of them conversed, a few seconds had already passed. The other students in the entire examination hall had already finished the assessment, leaving only Li Yueming who had not punched. Other than Uncle, Auntie, Li Linglong, and a small number of students from grade 12 class 6 of the Starry Sky Martial Academy, the surrounding audience had already shifted their gazes to the student with the best results in this assessment. The cheers and applause belonged to the winner. For a coward like Li Yueming who didn't even dare to try, it would be disrespectful to the other students if his gaze lingered for another second. Attention everyone, the strength assessment has ended. 10 seconds passed in the blink of an eye. The head examiner finally blew the whistle. His gaze swept across Li Yueming, who was still in the examination hall, with a trace of sympathy in his eyes. Although he did not know what was going on with this student, what awaited him next was probably the scolding and humiliation from his teachers, classmates, and relatives. After all, this was the ultimate assessment for the entire world. The students did not only represent themselves and the school, teachers, and family behind him. After being eliminated with such a dejected face, it would probably be difficult for him to raise his head in the future. However, just as he was about to announce the results of the competition one by one, he realized that the display screen in front of Li Yueming's sandbag had an extremely bright number 1522 kg. What the hell? Was there a problem with the display? That's not right. The structure of this thing couldn't be any simpler. How could there be such an outrageous problem? So what exactly happened just now? In the beginning, the audience did not notice the abnormality. It was not until he realized that the referee was standing on the high platform without saying anything for a long time, his eyes staring straight at a certain place. This aroused everyone's curiosity. They followed his line of sight and looked towards the examination hall. When their eyes met the number on the screen in front of Li Yueming, the entire exam hall fell silent. 1522 was more than 100 points higher than the strongest student. They just didn't pay attention for a moment. What the hell happened just now? The audience looked at the head examiner. However, what they didn't know was that at this moment, the head examiner was even more confused than they were. It wasn't easy for him to come back to his senses, and he hurriedly asked A0001 to check the surveillance video footage a few seconds before the end of the competition. On the high platform, the white-haired old man, who had thought that he had already won, immediately sat up from his chair. His eyes widened when he saw the numbers that suddenly appeared on the screen. After a long while, he lay back on the chair and muttered, "He is indeed an interesting young man." Not only did he drag it out until the last second to throw a punch, but he actually managed to exceed 1,500 kilograms, a monster. Leon raised his eyebrows. The others might not have seen it clearly, but the two of them, as level 8 martial artists who had transcended the planet's restraints, naturally knew everything that had happened. Li Yueming, who had been silent, threw a punch at the end of the assessment. In just an instant, his unremarkable fists collided with the sandbag and sent it flying dozens of meters away silently. The terrifying number of 1,522 kilograms appeared on the interface. With the physical chain on, he could unleash more than 1,500 kilograms of power with a single punch. He could be considered a monster among monsters in the entire Imperial Sun star field, right? A piece of unpolished jade of such quality could be born on such a remote planet. It was simply unbelievable. Chapter 783, 319, Evelyn, The Cruel Truth, _1. He looked at Li Yueming, who had exerted more than 1,500 kilograms of force with a single punch. Even Leon and the white-haired elder were speechless, not to mention the audience below them. Li Linglong's eyes lit up as she stared at Li Yueming from head to toe and said to her uncle and aunt, more than 1,500 kilograms. It's almost breaking the record for the special referee's assessment in the past few decades. Dad, Mom, look. Uncle and aunt naturally did not take their eyes off him the entire time. When they heard this, they said happily, I'm watching, what did I say? Our Li family's child is indeed extraordinary. It should be so powerful. The uncle laughed with his arms crossed in front of his chest. The corners of his mouth were almost reaching his ears. It was as if the person standing under the spotlight at this moment was not Li Yueming but himself. Aunt and Li Linglong couldn't help but roll their eyes. The head examiner finally managed to get the surveillance footage of Li Yueming's entire assessment. Through the video replay, it was discovered that Li Yueming had suddenly punched at the last second before the end. At that time, no one was paying attention to him, and the speed of the punch was too fast. That was why no one understood what had happened after the exam ended. So this young. He only used one punch to unleash a force that was beyond the reach of 3 punches? After realizing this possibility, everyone in the audience, including the head examiner, could not help but gasp. Test, the assessment is over. The head examiner swallowed his saliva and finally came back to his senses. He looked at Li Yueming and asked, why did you only punch when it was almost over? It's very dangerous. At this moment, Li Yueming also left the examination hall. He smiled and said, you don't know this, but this move of mine is called deliberate punch. The longer the time it takes to accumulate power, the stronger the attack. So, it's very necessary for me to drag it out until the last moment of the exam. Don't look at me just because I only threw one punch. In fact, by accumulating power, this punch of mine can unleash a power that others can't even unleash after several punches. After hearing Li Yueming's explanation, many people were stunned for a moment before they recovered. So that punch just now was a martial arts technique similar to a move? By accumulating the power in his body, he could instantly unleash destructive power that far exceeded the imagination of ordinary people. Although it sounded quite ridiculous, it did not seem like there was no room for maneuver. Then the question was, could this kind of method of exerting force, which was similar to rubbing the edge, be counted as a real result? There was no doubt about the answer. Definitely. Li Yueming's punch was not a deliberate punch. It was just a simple and powerful straight punch. The reason why he could burst out such a terrifying power was that his body was close to perfection. In other words, as long as he wanted to, he could punch out 4,500 kilograms of force with 3 punches. It would not be a problem for him to break the record of Planet 7 200,003. However, that would be too ostentatious. Not only would they not be able to get much benefits, but they would also cause a lot of unnecessary trouble. After all, even if the Alliance of Law and Order could tolerate a freak, other people with ulterior motives might not be able to tolerate it. When the time came, he would be in the open, and those with ulterior motives would hide in the dark. It would be easy to dodge an open spear, but difficult to defend against an arrow in the dark. If he was not careful, he might fall into their trap. And this kind of statement was obviously much easier to accept. It not only showed his talent and strength, but also did not attract the attention of some people with ulterior motives. Of course, this statement could not fool the top group of people. After all, as high-level martial artists who had witnessed it with their own eyes, they naturally knew better than Li Yueming whether Li Yueming was charging up his strength and whether he could really only punch once. However, Li Yueming believed that the other party would smooth things over for him. Sure enough, before the crowd could finish their discussion, the military committee had already made a decision. Furthermore, it was Evelyn, the Commander-in-Chief of the Military Committee on Planet 7 to 20,003, who had personally promised that the results would be effective. He also told all the examinees that as long as they could use the so-called deliberate punch similar to Li Yueming's in this round of strength assessment, their results could be retested. The crowd was in a short uproar. When they saw that the Commander-in-Chief had come down personally, the debate was finally suppressed. Of course, even so, the attention on Li Yueming was still very high. It was 10 times or 100 times higher than any other examinee present. After all, this was a super genius who had attracted the attention of the military council's commander-in-chief in the first round of the assessment. It was very likely that after this round of assessment, he would spread his wings and completely escape the attention of the ordinary people. How could he not attract attention? After this small episode, the assessment had to continue. Li Yueming's existence brought immense pressure to all the other examinees, especially those geniuses who had high aspirations and were determined to get the special recommendation slot. After all, according to the usual practice in the past, there were only 3 special recommendations. Now, Li Yueming had already received the attention of the Commander-in-Chief. As long as the results of the next 2 rounds of assessment were not too far apart, he would most likely have a spot in the assessment. In other words, even if they fought to the death, they could only snatch one of the other 2 spots. It was even more difficult than crossing a single log bridge with thousands of troops. Chapter 784, 319, Evelyn, The Cruel Truth, _2. On the spectator stand at the top of the dojo, which was specially built for the judges, a 25-year-old woman in military uniform with an extremely hot figure quietly appeared. Looking at the white-haired old man lying on the stage with his arms spread out and Leon who was deep in thought, Evelyn frowned and said unhappily, "Didn't I tell you to watch over here? Why do I have to clean up after such a big thing?" Upon hearing this, Leon was the first to wake up from his thoughts. He looked left and right, and when he saw the angry Evelyn, he quickly stood up and bowed. "Commander-in-Chief, may I know what instructions you have?" The white-haired old man smacked his lips. Although he was holding it in, he still accidentally burped and said, "Commander, this old man is about to retire at this age. His reaction speed has decreased." Leon immediately glared at him. This damned old man was lying through his teeth. When he said that he wanted to start the bet, his reaction speed was very fast. Evelyn glanced at the 2 of them. After a while, she covered her head and said, "Who did I offend? Get all of you weirdos to be my subordinates." Sighing, Evelyn didn't pursue the 2 slackers anymore. She walked to the edge of the spectator stand and looked down. She found that the students had already begun the second round of speed tests. This time, Li Yueming was calm and steady. He didn't make any shocking moves, and his final score was only at the top. "This kid is interesting." Evelyn stroked her chin. "He's even playing dirty. Could it be that such a big universe couldn't accommodate a young genius like him?" Leon pursed his lips. "If I really hit 4,500 kilograms with 3 punches, how big of a commotion do you think it will cause, Commander?" Evelyn thought for a moment and said uncertainly, "The which galaxy is shaking?" It didn't seem right either. If it gets bigger, will the Emperor Yang star field shake? At this point, Evelyn felt that it was a little ridiculous and said in disbelief, "Is this really a genius from a small starfield like ours?" The white-haired old man spread his hands and said, "This kind of thing is not something we need to care about, right? In any case, this kid was quite smart, wasn't he?" Evelyn nodded. Other things might be controversial, but this point was unquestionable. They had seen countless geniuses in their lives, but very few of them could reach their current level. Could it be that their talent was not high enough? Naturally not. At the very least, there were countless people who were more talented than them. However, on the path of martial arts, although talent occupied a very important part, it was never absolute. Heaven was never fair, but from another perspective, it was also fair. Geniuses obtained talents far beyond ordinary people, but most of them thought highly of themselves and were arrogant. They did not know that a moment of carelessness could cost their lives. Often, it was their batch of talents that could not be considered top-notch that were able to grow up in the end. But now, while Li Yueming displayed his super talent, he also showed his cautious side. This was a truly intelligent person, and a genius that the Alliance of Law truly needed. As long as he could keep his mind steady, his future achievements would be limitless. I've already gotten A0002 to block the video of this assessment. Since this kid is so cautious, he should not cause any more trouble in the future. She wanted to know how far he could go. Evelyn looked at Li Yueming with interest. At this time, Li Yueming had also completed the second assessment. His results were not particularly outrageous, but because of the foundation of the previous strength assessment, his current results were still worthy of being the top. In fact, this event was basically child's play for Li Yueming. Even if he was rather restrained and didn't display any ridiculous moves, he could still pass easily. Out of 100 points, he got 92 points, just one more than the second place. The second round of assessment was to test the student's familiarity with martial arts moves. Li Yueming was still able to defeat the enemy with one move, and he directly used a deliberate punch to end the battle. His barbaric and violent methods left the audience dumbfounded. The military committee had promoted the special referee's assessment for hundreds of years, and there had been many changes in the assessment for various reasons. This assessment plan was already the simplest and most efficient method after hundreds of years of experience. However, he didn't expect that an anomaly would appear today. He forcefully turned this test that caused countless geniuses a headache into his own personal show. The assessment ended with Li Yueming in first place. The second place was 4 points behind him. After the 3 rounds of assessment, the competition for the final spots would begin in the afternoon. Li Yueming and the other students returned to the resting area prepared by the organizers to wait for the final assessment in the afternoon. During this period, the examinees were not allowed to leave the examination venue. Similarly, only a few core family members could enter the examination hall to investigate the situation of the examinees. Under the guidance of the teacher, Li Yueming came to a small room in the lounge of the martial arts club. About 5 minutes later, his uncle, aunt, and Li Linglong also arrived. When he saw Li Yueming, his uncle said excitedly, "Kid, good job. Uncle is proud of you. Big brother will be very happy to see your current achievements in heaven." Li Yueming smiled but didn't say anything. Even the original owner did not have much of an impression of her cheap parents in this life, let alone him, an outsider who only occupied a shell. Naturally, her feelings for him were even weaker. Li Linglong's face revealed some envy, but her mouth was still unforgiving. She also said, "Tisk, I didn't expect that I would really be fooled by you. Just wait, when the time comes, I will also participate in this assessment. I won't be left behind by you too much." As she spoke, she shook her fist to show her determination. Li Yueming only smiled at this. Was Li Linglong talented? There was definitely something. However, it was really not much. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stayed in the Commoner Academy. With her talent, it was definitely more than enough for her to participate in the Military Academy's assessment. However, it was obviously difficult for her to enter the list of special referees. It wasn't that Li Yueming was trying to hurt her. It was the cold and cruel truth. Evelyn's previous description was very accurate. Geniuses often fell more easily, and their achievements were often inferior to ordinary warriors. However, there was one thing that she did not mention. To the natives of remote planets like them, if they weren't shockingly talented geniuses, they wouldn't even have the chance to step onto the interstellar stage, let alone advancement. Evelyn, Leon, and the others were from large planets, and they enjoyed the best resources and treatment in the central universe. That was why they could come to the conclusion that even if they had average talent, they could still become powerhouses. But in fact, for the vast majority of people on remote planets, if they didn't risk their lives and fight their way up into the Alliance of Law's resource circle, they would only be trapped on their own planet and unable to escape the heavy reality. For example, if Li Linglong had been born in the Central Universe, with her mediocre talent, she could have become a level 10 warrior like Evelyn in the future. However, because she was born on Planet 7 to 20,003, which was a remote place at the edge of the universe, and because of her talent, she could not participate in the special candidate assessment. She had to go through the internal passage to the Imperial Sun Star, so she could only go to the military academy to study according to the normal procedures. She would need to do her best to become a level 6 martial artist. When the time came, if he had the strength, he would see if he could help this little girl. After all, although Li Linglong was always bad-mouthing him, blood was still thicker than water. It was good to let her see the vastness of the universe. Chapter 785, Rising Star, Hot, _1. Li Yueming's results in the first 2 rounds of the assessment were not bad. Now, he was fully deserving of the first place in the total score. If the other geniuses wanted to catch up from behind, they had to ensure that they performed exceptionally in the last and most critical combat segment, or they could only pray that Li Yueming made a mistake. However, this was obviously impossible. Li Yueming's performance was still very stable, firmly occupying a special recommendation spot. The other students could only turn to fight for the other 2. The so-called actual combat segment. It was controlled by the military committee's Special Artificial Intelligence A0002 to fight against the students. A0002 was an upgraded version of A0001. Its computing power was several versions ahead of A0001. Dealing with such a small situation was naturally not a problem. Basically, it could guarantee that there was no difference in the difficulty of the students. The specific rules of the assessment were that every time the students hit the robot puppet controlled by A0002, they would receive 10 points, and every time they were hit by the robot puppet, 10 points would be deducted. The entire assessment process lasted 10 minutes. Only students who could hit the target 20 times in a row without being hit once by the robot puppet plant would be able to obtain a full score of 200 points. This kind of indiscriminately fought Nandu's students, who had average combat skills, was simply a nightmare. Most of the students were beaten up one-sidedly from the beginning to the end of the assessment, without any chance to fight back. Not to mention the full score of 200 points, if they really had to calculate, they would still owe A0002 dozens or hundreds of points. Only a very small number of geniuses were able to perform well in this assessment, but it was also very difficult. Under such circumstances, Li Yueming was still hiding his strength. However, his every move and his score were still extremely exaggerated. With a full score of 200 points, it was already very good for a student to get a passing score of 120 points. Even in the past few decades, those geniuses who passed the special referee's test did not get more than 150 points. Li Yueming, on the other hand, did not even blush or gasp for breath as he obtained a high score of 165 points. Once again, he used his powerful strength to ignite the atmosphere of the entire venue. Countless onlookers cheered. This was respect and encouragement for outstanding people. In such a universe where the entire population was fighting, only when more geniuses appeared and fought against the Zergs without regard for their own safety could ordinary people live peacefully on their own planets and not be affected by the disaster. He looked at the jubilant people below his feet. Evelyn also smiled, which was a rare sight. She turned to Leon and the white-haired old man. An outstanding young man. I want this person. I'll write a recommendation letter myself. Hearing this, the white-haired old man curled his lips in dissatisfaction and said, "You're the senior officer. Our subordinates only need to listen to orders and don't dare to say anything. Is that so?" Evelyn asked, still smiling. "However, the meaning behind your words doesn't seem to be respectful at all." Seeing the dangerous expression on her face, the white-haired old man immediately admitted defeat and did not speak. Leon had warned him that Evelyn was petty. However, he only realized that she was not only narrow-minded, but also undemocratic and liberal after interacting with her a few times. If not for her strength and beauty, she would not be likable at all. If I remember correctly, you haven't written a recommendation letter to the Federation for more than 30 years, right? Leon interrupted. It's not easy for this kid to get your favor. Evelyn smiled. I don't write recommendation letters because there are people I don't like at the headquarters. Rather than embarrassing myself by sending them over, I might as well let you send them. Leon tilted his head. This was the first time he had heard Evelyn mention it. He didn't expect such a difficult woman like Evelyn to have an opponent that he disliked but couldn't do anything about. He couldn't help but feel curious. It seems that you have high hopes for him this time. Leon laughed. Evelyn did not answer. However, the eagerness on her face betrayed her inner thoughts. All 3 assessments had ended. With his excellent performance, Li Yueming had become the star of the future in this year's special referees assessment. Next, they only needed to check the scores twice to confirm that there were no problems before they entered the final announcement of the names. During the intermission segment this time, before Li Yueming could return to the rest area, he was already surrounded by reporters and major interest groups on Planet 7 to 20,003. Everyone looked at him eagerly. Student Li, a reporter asked, I'm a reporter from the Which Galaxy's Hungguang Universal Radio Group. May I ask how you trained your body to be so strong? Can you give us an answer? Li Yueming couldn't refuse. Although he had never heard of this so-called Hungguang Universe Infinite Broadcasting Group, the television stations that could rush in front of the contestants on such an occasion all had deep backgrounds. Moreover, their prefixing was the Which Galaxy, which meant that they were at least a galaxy-level television station. Therefore, Li Yueming didn't want to offend him, so he replied, I'm best at push UPS. I do hundreds of push UPS every day before and after school. I didn't go bald, but I did become stronger. Li Yueming continued to walk forward after replying to the message. At this moment, a business elite in a suit rushed up. When he saw him approaching, the other guys who wanted to join in the fun obviously stopped in their tracks. They waited for him to approach Li Yueming first before continuing to line up behind him. From this, it could be seen that his background was more solid than that of the television reporter just now. Chapter 786, Rising Star, Hot, _2. Mr. Li, the middle-aged man said eagerly, I'm Francois, the general manager of Hank Mining Group on Planet 7 to 20,003. Our group admires outstanding young people like you very much. Is there anything we can help you with? Please feel free to ask. Our Hank Mining Group is very happy to provide you with help. Hank Mining Group was a super large company that spanned across the Imperial Sun star field. It was one of the largest companies in the star field apart from the Alliance of Law. It controlled the mining, metal smelting, military weapons research and development, and other businesses. Together with a few other military giants, it monopolized almost all the arms trading markets in the Imperial Sun star field. They also had some mining operations on Planet 7 to 20,003. He did not expect that the person in charge of such a huge company would actually take the initiative to come to him and offer him help. Not to mention Li Yueming himself, even the reporters and business group leaders who wanted to interview were shocked. His attitude toward Li Yueming became more cautious. To be able to obtain the recognition of such a cross-star sector-level corporation, Li Yueming was definitely not that simple. Not every genius who passed the special recommendation test was worthy of being personally sent by Francois, a high-ranking person in charge of the planet. Most of the time, just sending an assistant to ask was already considered very important. In response, Li Yueming replied enthusiastically, Hello, Mr. Francois. I don't need any help for the time being, but we can exchange contact information. Francois nodded and was very satisfied with Li Yueming's attitude. Some young people would suddenly become arrogant once they became famous. They thought that they were invincible and had powerful talents that far exceeded ordinary people. They would not even look at the opportunities that came to their doorstep. Some people would even coldly reject them. Although most of the people present wanted to get enough returns from their investments. But where did free lunch come from? It was a good thing to be paid attention to and invested resources, but there were always some young people who did not understand. After exchanging contact information with Li Yueming, Francois left with satisfaction. After Li Yueming exchanged contact information with a few other star sector level big shots, it was finally the turn of the local business group on Planet 7 to 20,003. But at this time, Li Yueming had already entered the rest area. The soldiers of the military committee were armed and guarded outside. Even the big shots of the star sector level business groups did not dare to come forward, let alone the little Karami who were only famous in the local area. However, even though he had lost the opportunity to interact with Li Yueming, he still had a lot of time left. However, they obviously would not give up on such a potential stock that could become a big shot in the future. Since they couldn't get in touch with Li Yueming today, they could only fight the next day. Anyway, as long as Li Yueming hadn't left Planet 7 to 20,003, they still had the chance to say hello. This was the charm of the special referee's examination. A genius, a talented genius. As long as one was recognized by the military committee on this stage, they would become a hot new star. In the past, you couldn't even enter a place that you couldn't afford to climb, but today, you would be like a dog that smelled a business opportunity. It was to train talents to resist the Zergs. It was also for their own little plans. In short, this world was tolerant of geniuses. The only prerequisite for everything was that one had enough potential. It was not easy to get rid of the harassment of the enthusiastic masses outside. Li Yueming heaved a sigh of relief. In the resting area, Li Linglong and her uncle and aunt had already arrived. Now that he saw him, his uncle said happily, "Well done. Your exam today is absolutely brilliant. You've won glory for the 3 generations of the Li family." The aunt's expression also carried some pride as she added, "Just now, there were reporters from the local television station chasing after your uncle to ask him about the secret to educating his children. Your uncle almost spouted nonsense. It was only because I pulled him back that he didn't embarrass you." Li Yueming couldn't help but laugh. "Why are you pulling uncle? If he likes to talk, then let him talk. Anyway, when the time comes, it won't be embarrassing for me if he boasted to the heavens." The aunt covered her mouth and laughed, not saying a word. However, there were crystal clear tears falling from the corners of her eyes. Although he was very happy at the moment. Although no one mentioned it, everyone knew that Li Yueming would leave Planet 7 to 20,003 soon after he passed the special recommendation hurdle. There was a vast sea of stars between the few of them. Who knew when they would meet again? They might even be like Li Yueming's parents who went to recruit soldiers. If he went, he would never be able to come back. However, they couldn't stop him. After all, they weren't Li Yueming's biological parents. Moreover, it was a rule that the human race had evolved since they grew up. Most importantly, his destination was to fight the Zergs and protect all the suffering planets of the Alliance of Order. If everyone was afraid of death, how could the so-called Universal United Front continue? All they could do was try their best not to cause trouble for Li Yueming. After all, they were just ordinary people, and they could only give their children an ordinary life. Now that the child had created a bright future through his own talent and hard work, what they should do was to silently bless him and not stop him from running towards a better and greater future. Chapter 787, Rising Star, Hot, _3. That was all. Li Yueming felt the subtle atmosphere and guessed the reason after thinking about it for a while. The smile on his lips also lessened a little. He also wanted to live a peaceful life here. However, reality did not allow him to stop. Perhaps one day in the future, after everything was over, he would be able to stop running for a long time and spend his life slowly and fully. Now, he could only tell himself that everything in front of him was fake. Just like those illusory memories of his past, they were all roads with no return. Thinking of this, Li Yueming put away the laughable fragility in his heart. He looked at Li Linglong and said, "How is it? What do you mean?" Li Linglong asked with some doubt. "Are you talking about the exam just now?" "I admit. You're a little handsome, but that's all. I'll definitely catch up and surpass you." Li Yueming smiled. This girl was stubborn. He gestured with his fist and said, "Oh? In that case, as a future competitor, I shouldn't tell you how I did all of this." Hearing this, Li Linglong was stunned. Her cute little face was filled with struggle. In the end, she lowered her head and said weakly, "All right, I admit that you are stronger than me. So can you really tell me the secret manual to become stronger?" Li Yueming didn't say anything. He looked at his uncle and aunt. Seeing that the two of them didn't have any strange expressions, he said solemnly, "Then, the first thing I want to tell you is that there is no secret manual for becoming strong. Everything given by the heavens is fair. If he gave you a pair of wings, he will give others a knife to cut off your wings. So don't rely on anything you can rely on. All you can rely on is a heart that respects everything, and that illusory fate." Li Linglong was stunned again. It was obvious that Li Yueming's words were too serious and heavy for a girl who was not even 18 years old. It took her a long time to recover. Looking at Li Yueming, who was filled with killing intent, as if he had just walked through an Azura arena, he felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured on his body, filling him with a bone-chilling chill. However, Li Yueming was obviously not going to let her off easily. He continued, "So, are you really ready to become stronger? Or do you still think that the path to becoming stronger is just a show in school?" Li Linglong opened her mouth, wanting to answer. However, under Li Yueming's gaze, he could not say anything for a long time. She did not understand how this cousin who was usually harmless and would not get angry no matter how smelly her mouth was could suddenly release a terrifying aura that was like a mountain of corpses in a sea of blood. However, Li Yueming was obviously not prepared to explain to her. He still said coldly, "The final destination of becoming stronger is the battlefield, and the final destination of the battlefield is death. When you are mentally prepared to die, think about whether you want to follow me or not." As he said that, there was already a knock on the door from the Military Affairs Committee. Li Yueming raised his wrist to look at the time. It should be the final review of the assessment results. According to the procedure, after announcing the results of the assessment, he had to go to the stage to be reviewed by the Commander-in-Chief and Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Military Council. He had to personally receive the important letter of special recommendation from them. Li Yueming stood up and took out a yellowed booklet from his pocket. "This is what you want. Before you open it, please think about what I said just now. Make sure that you have prepared yourself mentally before you start learning. Consider it the last thing that my cousin can do for you." After saying this, he stood up and walked out without hesitation. Only Li Linglong, who was staring blankly at the book, and her uncle and aunt, who were worried, were left behind. Chapter 788, Breaking the Record, Getting the Entry, _1. After leaving Li Linglong with a detailed explanation of the third cultivation plan for personal magnificent power warriors, he was very excited. Li Yueming left without looking back. As long as he was still alive, even if he had to wander in the depths of the universe, his uncle and aunt would not have to worry about the economy. The major corporations and official forces on Planet 7 to 20,003 would fight to help his uncle and aunt's family. After all, in a sense, uncle and auntie were Li Yueming's roots on Planet 7 to 20,003. As long as his roots were still here, Li Yueming was still a part of this planet. Therefore, the various factions would try their best to make uncle and auntie feel happy no matter what. Therefore, the only person that Li Yueming needed to worry about was his cousin Li Linglong. Both uncle and aunt were already in their 40s, and there would be no accidents if they stayed on planet 7 to 200,003. However, Li Linglong was different. She was still young and had a certain amount of martial arts talent. Her future was full of unknown and uncertainties. However, in such a tragic world, Li Yueming didn't know if giving Li Linglong the secret to improving her martial arts was a good thing or a bad thing. Perhaps the illusory path of martial arts he had given her would make her face endless pain. Or perhaps she could have lived a happy life in the back. Because of this, Li Yueming hesitated for a long time before finally deciding to leave this difficult choice to Li Linglong. What he needed to do was to state the pros and cons of the two paths as clearly as possible. After all, one had to choose and work hard on one's own life path. The path chosen by others would always be others. Only then would he have enough reason to grit his teeth and persevere. At this moment, the scores of the 3 rounds of assessment for the special referees had already begun to be announced. The crowd in the dojo was so excited that all the people on planet 7 to 20,003 were nervously watching the information announced on the holographic electronic display screen at the top of the dojo. On this screen, the names of the reference students, the school they graduated from, and the most important test scores would be announced in order from low to high. Most of the geniuses in the top 3 were the winners of the special recommendation quota test. And this recommendation could allow students to go directly to the core of the Imperial Sun Star field, the Imperial Sun Star, to study and study. Among them, the ones with the best results even had the hope of entering the Imperial Sun Star's Ultimate Martial Arts Academy. The Imperial Sun Star was the core region of the entire Imperial Sun Star field. No other planet could compare to it in terms of resources and technology. Putting aside the fact that these recruited students were already geniuses, even if they were mediocre, as long as they could enter the school for further study, they would be able to shine far beyond their peers on other planets. Especially the Imperial Sun Star's Ultimate Martial Academy, which was a martial paradise that countless young students in the entire Imperial Sun Star field could reach. The only supreme class expert in the Imperial Sun Star field was the nominal principal of the Ultimate Martial Arts Academy. One could imagine how deep the background and achievements of this academy were. It was a well-deserved cradle of new stars in the entire universe. Of course, it was obviously very difficult to be ranked in the top 3 in this assessment. Many students did not come here to participate in the assessment just to obtain a special refereement. Those geniuses who ranked in the top 10 in the assessment would actually receive a lot of financial support from the financial groups and the official level. The school would also be able to show their face and earn the next year's recruitment gimmick. This was what those mediocre geniuses paid the most attention to. As for the special recommendation spot, if they could win it, they would naturally win the first prize. It didn't matter if they didn't. These trivial matters had nothing to do with Li Yueming. Under the guidance of the staff, he came to an elevator on the right side of the previous examination hall. Here, he met 2 other young people who were about the same age as him. At this moment, the 2 of them looked at him with some doubt and vigilance. Li Yueming also recognized the 2 students. The tall and thin student on the left was called Fan Li. He had obtained about 320 points in the previous 3 assessments. The burly student on the right was called Lu Dali. He had obtained about 330 points in the 3 assessments. He was the genius student with the best performance in the previous assessments. At this moment, the 2 of them looked at Li Yueming with different meanings. Fan Li looked at Li Yueming with a gaze filled with doubt and vigilance. It was obvious that he was extremely curious and doubtful about Li Yueming, a peer who performed far better than him in the assessment. No distractions were allowed in the examination hall. Therefore, most of them only knew that Li Yueming's results were very high, but they didn't know how he obtained such results. Thus, it was normal for Fan Li to have this expression. After all, Li Yueming's score was too high, so high that Fan Li couldn't imagine how he had managed to get through all the obstacles. On the other hand, Lu Dali's gaze towards Li Yueming was much simpler and cruder. This burly young man was staring at Li Yueming at the moment. His face was filled with an itching desire to fight. If it wasn't for the dissuasion of the surrounding staff, he would have rushed up to fight Li Yueming. Chapter 789, Breaking the Record, Getting the Entry, _2. His thoughts were very simple. Li Yueming was very strong. If he could defeat Li Yueming, it would prove that he was stronger than Li Yueming. As for the gap between them, this would only be known after they fought. Before they had exchanged blows, he would never admit that he had lost to Li Yueming in the assessment. Of course, Li Yueming wasn't interested in their thoughts. The reason why he sized up the two of them was because the three of them would be together for a long time. Not far away from the martial arts hall, the virtual display on the score leaderboard had also revealed the most critical moment. Li Yueming, Fan Li, and Lu Dali heard the noise outside. They all looked at the electronic display screen at the same time and saw a few lines of words on the huge virtual display screen. Third place in the assessment, Fan Li, from Overlord Martial School, total score of 321. Second place in the assessment, Lu Dali, from Harlan International Martial Arts School, total score of 338. First place of the assessment, Yueming, from the Starry Sky Martial Arts School, total score of 362. As soon as the three names appeared, the entire dojo fell silent. A moment later, there was a sudden burst of cheers. There was no other reason. It was because Li Yueming, who had the highest score in this assessment, had done too well. He had broken the curse that had been stuck on Planet 7 to 20,003 for the past 50 years, where the three assessments of special referees could not exceed 350 points. And he had successfully raised the record by 12 points. This was an honor for the people of Planet 7 to 20,003. It was very normal for the crowd to cheer. Seeing the names of the three people appear in the venue, the soldiers of the military committee who were originally waiting in front of the elevator took the initiative to speak. "Congratulations, please enter the elevator. Commander-in-Chief Evelyn and the two Deputy Commanders-in-Chief are waiting for you upstairs." When they heard the words Commander-in-Chief Evelyn, the two young men, except for Li Yueming, held their breaths. For these young people with no background, the meeting with the Commander-in-Chief and Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Military Council was something they would never dare to dream of. However, now that everything was about to become a reality, it was inevitable that a strange sense of absurdity arose in his heart. It was not easy for them to adjust themselves before they entered the elevator under the signal of the soldiers. Due to his nervousness, even his muscles were stiff when he walked. The elevator slowly rose, and the two of them didn't even have a place to look. Seeing that Li Yueming was acting as if nothing had happened, Fan Li couldn't help but ask, "I heard that Commander-in-Chief Evelyn is a level 10 martial artist and a beauty. Don't you feel nervous?" Li Yueming was observing the mechanical devices in the elevator at the moment. He resisted the urge to dismantle some parts to study them and replied casually, "She's not a man-eating tiger. What's there to be nervous about?" Fan Li's expression was slightly frightened when he heard this. He immediately looked around, afraid that someone would notice him. After a moment, he said in a low voice, "What did you say?" "Don't worry, this elevator has a very strong soundproofing function," Li Yueming said with a smile. Even though Li Yueming said so confidently. However, Fan Li was obviously still a little mutter. He didn't dare to talk to Li Yueming anymore, afraid that he would say something shocking. However, before Fan Li's nervous little heart could recover, Lu Dali, who was standing opposite him, clenched his fist and knocked on the glass of the elevator cubicle, making loud banging sounds. As he knocked, he muttered, "I wonder if this thing can take a punch." Seeing that he was eager to give it a try, it seemed that he was really prepared to punch out to see how strong the elevator was. Fan Li was so frightened that his hair almost stood on end. He hurriedly stopped him, "What are you doing? Can't you stop?" Lu Dali pursed his lips. After waving his sandbag-sized fist a few times, he did not really smash it down. After looking around, his gaze landed on Li Yueming again. He said in a low and muffled voice, "Hey, how did you manage to punch out 1,500 kilograms with one punch? Are you interested in fighting me?" Li Yueming didn't say anything. This time, Lu Dali couldn't take it anymore. He walked a few steps closer and said in a muffled voice, "Hey, didn't you hear me talking to you? Are you deaf?" Li Yueming still didn't say anything. He seemed to be in a daze. In the end, Fan Li saw that the situation was not right and rushed forward to separate Lu Dali and Li Yueming. This time, Fan Li finally realized that there was no normal person among the three people present except for him. Li Yueming was arrogant. Lu Dali, on the other hand, was a super boorish man. He would do anything he wanted. Although they had passed the actual combat assessment, they had yet to pass the interview with the three referees. If he caused trouble now and lost the special recommendation spot that he had already obtained, he would probably have nowhere to cry. The elevator soon arrived at the designated location. Ding! After a crisp sound, the elevator doors made of unknown materials opened from both sides. Lu Dali took the lead and walked at the front. Fan Li patted Li Yueming's shoulder and walked in the middle. Li Yueming opened his eyes and walked at the end. There was a huge platform outside the elevator. It was located in the center of the entire martial arts club and was also the best place to see. Chapter 790, Breaking the Record, Getting the Entry, _3. The three of them arrived outside the platform. As expected, he saw Evelyn and the other two sitting in the middle of the platform. As the main character entered the venue, the reporters and high-ranking officials from all walks of life who were originally blocked by the soldiers also rushed in. Soon, the entire high platform was covered by the crowd. The people in the martial arts hall below the stage could not get up to this position. They could only watch the situation in the arena through a 0001's live broadcast video. Evelyn and the others glanced at the three students and sized up Li Yueming. A moment later, Evelyn smiled and said, "I'm very happy that three more outstanding geniuses have appeared on our planet. I hope that you can contribute to the Alliance of Order in the future." Fan Li was very excited, and his face was flushed red as he said, "I'll definitely die." Lu Dali glanced at Evelyn, and for some reason, his originally lawless personality was restrained. He lowered his head like a mountain cat meeting a tiger. "Me too." Li Yueming was the only one who wasn't too affected. He sized up Evelyn and replied, "I'm willing to serve you, Commander." A level 10 martial artist was actually no different from an ordinary person just by looking at their appearance. It was just that Evelyn looked more beautiful and elegant. In fact, Li Yueming could feel the terrifying power in Evelyn's body that was like a wild beast. He didn't even doubt that Evelyn's full power could easily destroy a small planet. One had to know that even the remnant soul of the supreme being of the bug tribe in the previous world could only display the combat power of destroying the surface of the planet because it was limited by the will of heaven and earth and the laws of the universe. But now, in the vast universe, the commander-in-chief of a small planet in the side courtyard had the power to destroy the planet with a wave of his hand. Was this the charm of the big stage in the big world? As he pondered, Li Yueming's heart was filled with anticipation and fighting spirit. The bigger the stage, the greater the danger, but the corresponding upper limit of personal strength growth was also higher. As long as there were no accidents in this life, his upper limit of growth might be 10 times or 100 times wider than the previous lives combined. Looking at the docile students in front of her, Evelyn nodded in satisfaction. She didn't say much and said directly, "This time, student Li Yueming's results are very outstanding, breaking the record of the past 50 years. Therefore, I am prepared to make an exception and write a recommendation letter to student Li Yueming, recommending him to study on the Imperial Sun planet." At this point, she paused and looked at Fan Li and Lu Dali. "Of course, the two of you are also very outstanding. Deputy Commander Leon and Senior Golden Leaf will write you a recommendation letter. You will also be going to the Imperial Sun Star, so there is not much difference in terms of treatment. If you don't have any objections, I'll write it immediately." The three of them nodded in agreement. Even Lu Dali, who had always been unyielding, did not dare to overstep his boundaries in this situation. After all, although he was rough and liked to be reckless, it did not mean that he was stupid and had no intelligence. Even if they were really dissatisfied with Li Yueming, they could settle it in private. A real man's battle was enough to solve all the problems. If he played tricks on such an occasion, he might be in the limelight for a short period of time, but the days ahead would be difficult. Chapter 791, Heading to the Imperial Sun Star. Time flew by. It had been a week since the special referee's assessment. During this period, Li Yueming had participated in the comprehensive examination organized by the military committee and passed it with excellent results. Next, they only needed to wait for the Imperial Sun Starfield to send an interstellar spaceship to take them to the Imperial Sun Star. Only those who had passed the special referee's assessment would receive this special treatment. The other ordinary students who had passed the unified assessment would have to wait for another half a month to board a large spaceship with the other students to head to the Witch Star system. Today was the day of departure. His uncle and aunt repeatedly reminded him to be careful. Li Linglong also looked at her cousin, who was both familiar and unfamiliar, with a complicated expression. She pursed her lips and hesitated for a long time before saying, "If you have time, don't forget to call back from the galaxy. The military committee has already said that you can get through 3 times a month." Li Yueming nodded, indicating that he already knew. Looking at his departing figure, Li Linglong called out to him again. She took out a pink box from behind her back and said, "Open it after you get on the spaceship. Don't forget about me and Dad and Mom." Looking at the pink gift box in front of him, Li Yueming was stunned. A moment later, he came back to his senses and smiled. Li Linglong rolled her eyes and said unhappily, "If I wasn't worried about you, I wouldn't care so much." Li Yueming was still smiling. Seeing that the military committee's car had arrived at the door of the house, he rubbed Li Linglong's head and felt the soft hair on her head. "Take good care of Uncle and Auntie. Don't let a third person see what I give you, understand?" Li Linglong's eyes were a little red. In order not to let Li Yueming see her sorry state, she quickly broke free and turned around. After a long while, she nodded to indicate that she already knew. Li Yueming then looked at his uncle and aunt and waved his hand, "Goodbye, if there's a chance in the future, I'll take you guys to play in the Emperor Yang Star Field." Uncle and aunt's eyes were also red. They nodded and did not say anything. So many reincarnations. Li Yueming had gone through many farewells. However, no matter how many times he experienced it, it was still unforgettable. Perhaps the weakness of humans was their emotions. As an emotional animal, it was always inevitable to fall into it. However, Li Yueming was glad that he still had feelings. After all, compared to having a fragile emotional system, he was more afraid that he would be like other reincarnators. Because he had traveled through too many worlds and seen too many deaths, his heart would eventually become numb and he would no longer be able to invest emotions into anyone. "Weng weng weng!" The military truck behind him urged. Li Yueming turned around and waved at his uncle and aunt before climbing into the back seat of the truck. As the engine trembled slightly, Li Yueming quickly left the Montenegro City area. When Li Yueming got out of the truck, the surrounding environment had become a flat and vast desert area. Looking up, he saw a small spaceship that was tens of meters long parked above the desert. The surface of the spaceship was very smooth, reflecting the sunlight like a mirror. From afar, it looked very technological. According to Li Yueming's understanding, the spaceship that was sent to welcome them was the military express of the Emperor Sun Star Field. The military express wasn't very big compared to the battleships, but it was also equipped with the 6th-generation Star Sector-level engine of the Alliance of Order. It could easily surpass the speed of light and was much faster than the fighter aircraft on the side. It could be considered a small military combat spaceship without any firepower. The lighter and smaller size of the spaceship allowed it to move freely between star fields, galaxies, and planets. At this moment, Fan Li and Lu Dali had already arrived before him. Beside them, Evelyn, Leon, and the white-haired elder, Golden Leaf, also came to the scene in person. After seeing Li Yueming arrive, standing below the spaceship, Evelyn said solemnly, "The Imperial Sun Galaxy isn't a small planet like ours. It's the most prosperous planet in the entire galaxy, and it's one of the core defense areas of the Alliance of Law's third defense line. Although you've obtained the special recommendation quota, don't think that this is the end. On the contrary, obtaining a special recommendation slot is only your starting point. Strictly speaking, it can't even be considered a starting point. It can only be considered a stepping stone. To be able to take root on that planet and not be chased away by others is already something to be proud of." At this point, she looked at Li Yueming and suddenly said, "Li Yueming, do you know why I haven't written a recommendation letter for more than 50 years? Under her gaze, Li Yueming had a bad feeling. "Please tell me, Commander-in-Chief." Evelyn stared at him for a long time before replying, "You should also know that you are different from other geniuses. This is naturally the biggest reason why I chose you." Li Yueming knew about this. After all, during the assessment, he had not used his full strength from the beginning to the end. At Evelyn and the others' level, as long as Li Yueming didn't deliberately hide, it was impossible to hide from their eyes. Of course, Li Yueming had never thought of hiding it from them. After all, under the condition of ensuring his own safety, the stronger the talent he revealed to the outside world, the better. Chapter 792, Heading to the Imperial Sun Star. Only with enough talent could one obtain more resources and a better springboard. And now, he had successfully obtained Evelyn's personal recommendation letter. Although Evelyn had previously announced to the outside world that her recommendation letter was not much different from Leon and the others, Li Yueming definitely did not believe it. If there was no difference, what was the difference between the authority of the Commander-in-Chief and the Deputy Commander-in-Chief? Li Yueming remained silent. Evelyn didn't dwell on this topic and continued, "With this recommendation letter of mine, you can go to the Imperial Sun Star Ultimate Martial Arts Academy to participate in an assessment. This is the highest privilege I can give you." Li Yueming remained expressionless. Fan Li and Lu Dali, who were standing on both sides, were shocked. Their faces were filled with disbelief. Imperial Sun Star's Ultimate Martial Arts Academy. This was a place that every warrior in the entire Emperor Yang Star area dreamed of going to. If the other academies on the Imperial Sun Star were considered the top in the entire Imperial Sun Star field, then they would be considered the top. In that case, the Imperial Sun Star Ultimate Martial Arts Academy was considered a top martial arts school in the entire Third Universe. Ordinary students did not even have the qualifications to take the entrance exam. But now, Evelyn had given Li Yueming a chance. This stimulation was enough to cause their blood pressure to soar, and their eyes turned red. Under such enticing stimulation, Lu Dali, who was already rough, stood up and said, "Lady Evelyn, can you give us a chance?" Evelyn looked at Lu Dali in surprise, then at Fan Li, who was beside Lu Dali with the same look of desire. She thought for a moment and replied, "If there are extra spots, it doesn't matter if I give each of you one. Unfortunately, I only have one recommendation every 10 years for a rank 10 martial artist, the Commander-in-Chief stationed on the planet." Seeing that Evelyn didn't lose her temper or reject him directly, Lu Dali and Fan Li were slightly relieved. But since there was room for bargaining, whether it was Lu Dali or Fan Li, they obviously didn't want to let go of this opportunity. Therefore, Lu Dali took the lead and stood out. "Lady Evelyn, of course we don't want to make things difficult for you, however, such a crucial spot could be a life-changing opportunity for us. So, Lu Dali looked at Li Yueming and said solemnly, "So, please give us a chance." "Oh?" Evelyn asked with interest. "Tell me." Taking a deep breath, Lu Dali braced himself. The results of the assessment cannot explain everything. The true fate of a martial artist is the battlefield. It is a desperate battle between life and death. Therefore, I want Sir to give us a fair chance to fight. After all, only by truly fighting will we know who is more qualified to obtain this quota. What you said makes sense. Evelyn raised her eyebrows, obviously happy to see the students fighting amongst themselves. She turned to Li Yueming and said, "In that case, Li Yueming, what do you think?" Li Yueming didn't expect such a farce to happen when they were about to board the spaceship. However, it was obviously Evelyn's doing. He didn't seem to have any reason to refuse, so he nodded. "Naturally, I have no objections. It's very fair for the fist to decide the quota." Lu Dali and Fan Li were shocked when they saw that he had agreed. Although Li Yueming's score was indeed much higher than theirs. However, just like what Lu Dali said, actual combat was not a test, and theoretical strength could never represent actual strength. For example, Lu Dali was tall and strong. Just his weight and physical fitness were much stronger than ordinary people of the same age. Moreover, because of his hot temper, he often went to the underground arena to fight since he was 12. It could be said that his copper skin and iron bones were honed through actual combat. It was also because of this that he was very confident that he could beat up Li Yueming, who was a flower in a greenhouse. As for Fan Li, he knew his own limits. Whether it was Li Yueming or Lu Dali, they were not people he could provoke under normal circumstances. However, there was no reason for him not to give it a try. Seeing that the few of them had no objections, Evelyn swallowed the words she wanted to say and happily took 2 steps back. Since it's a real battle, then there's no restriction on anything. I'll be the judge, and you guys can do whatever you want. With her watching on the field, both sides were naturally at ease. Lu Dali couldn't wait to step forward and say, "Let me be your opponent in the first round." Li Yueming glanced at Lu Dali, who looked anxious, and then at Fan Li, who was also eager to try. He shook his head and said, "In order to save time, the two of you should come together." Lu Dali and Fan Li were stunned. They looked at each other and saw the disbelief in each other's eyes. Was Li Yueming crazy? Such an important opportunity, yet he still dared to be careless? Evelyn and Leon, who were watching the show, also raised their eyebrows. They didn't expect Li Yueming to be so confident in his combat ability. Lu Dali finally came back to his senses. He felt that he had been greatly despised and could not help but fly into a rage. "Don't be too arrogant, kid. I can deal with you alone." Chapter 793, Heading to the Imperial Sun Star. As he spoke, he strode forward and rushed toward Li Yueming with a body full of oppression. On the way, he raised 2 palms that were bigger than palm leaf fans and clenched them into fists, wanting to send Li Yueming flying with one punch. Seeing this, Li Yueming remained motionless. He waited until the sandbag-sized fist was only an inch away from his face. Only then did he suddenly sway his body. However, it was just a slight shake. Lu Dali, who was originally determined to win this punch, only felt his vision blur. He saw Li Yueming, who was like a puppet earlier, suddenly disappear from his sight. When he came back to his senses, he realized that Li Yueming had already appeared on his left side. What was going on? How could he be so fast? Before Lu Dali could figure out what had happened, he felt his body suddenly rise into the air. He felt a great pain in his waist and abdomen, as if he had been torn apart by a blunt object. Boom! The heavy and huge body fell to the ground, raising a thick cloud of dust. After Lu Dali fell to the ground, he immediately clutched his abdomen tightly. The corners of his eyes kept twitching, and his teeth were about to shatter, but he could not stand up. Li Yueming did not look at him. His gaze continued to sweep toward Fan Li, who was not far away, and he asked, "Do you want to try it too?" A few seconds ago, Fan Li was still eager to try. He was fantasizing that if Li Yueming and Liu Dali could fight to the death, he might still have a chance to pick up the big mistake. However, he did not expect that Liu Dali would have already fallen to the ground and lost his ability to fight. Just now, Liu Dali was unable to see the entire battlefield due to his limited vision. As a bystander, he had seen everything clearly. When Liu Dali rushed over, Li Yueming only took a step to the left. However, the speed of this step was unimaginably fast. Liu Dali's fist was about to hit his face, but Li Yueming relied on his terrifying footwork and even more terrifying speed to arrive first. He did not give Liu Dali any time to react and easily dodged the fist. He turned around and kicked Liu Dali into the air. Fan Li couldn't accurately estimate how much power was contained in this kick. After all, in his line of sight, although Li Yueming's angle of force was very tricky, he still lacked the space to accumulate power and exert force. Logically speaking, the power of this kick should be very limited. With Liu Dali's tough body, it shouldn't be a problem for him to take the kick head-on. However, the problem was that Liu Dali was lying on the ground after enduring the kick. He struggled for a long time, but he couldn't even fart. This pier in front of him was dangerous. And it was extremely dangerous. Fan Li swallowed his saliva, the alarm in his heart was about to explode. He hurriedly shook his head and revealed a very sincere smile. "That. I don't need it. I think this spot is very suitable for you." Li Yueming nodded and turned to Evelyn. "Commander-in-Chief, what else do you have to say? Let's make it clear." Evelyn came back to her senses and coughed awkwardly. The reason why she agreed to let Fan Li and Liu Dali spar was naturally because she wanted to see how much Li Yueming had yet to show. Now that Li Yueming had seen through him, he lost his composure. "Since you have already proven your strength, I only have one thing to remind you. I'm an old enemy stationed on planet Ziwei. More than 50 years ago, I recommended a few students who went to planet Diang. They were all chased back by the student recommended by that petty old woman. She even specially wrote a letter to mock me, saying that the students I recommended were all trash. I can't take it anymore, but you also know that planet No. 7 to 20,003 is extremely remote. There aren't many geniuses who are worthy of being seen all year round. In order not to humiliate myself, I didn't continue to write letters to recommend him. Instead, I gave the spot to Leon and the others. Now that I've given you this spot, you should know what this means, right?" Chapter 794, Interstellar Fleet, Deep Space, _1. In the distant universe, a quiet and beautiful color was emitted. The military express, which was dozens of meters long, was traveling around a star ruin that was full of gravel, carefully avoiding the huge debris of the planet and passing through it slowly. According to the star chart, this area was called Nilra Star Ruins. Many years ago, there was a super-large planet that was almost as large as the Imperial Sun star. However, because the natives of the planet were courting death, they discovered that technology could not break through the space barrier and turned to the underground of the planet to mine and excavate. In the end, some unknown problem caused the entire planet to collapse and shatter. The debris of the exploded planet scattered in all directions, giving birth to this massive planet ruins. According to the investigation of the reconnaissance team of the Imperial Sun Galaxy, there was still a medium-sized black hole in the deepest part of the Nilra Star Ruins, which was constantly devouring the shattered planet fragments around it. If Li Yueming and the others wanted to go to the Imperial Sun star from star field 7 to 20,003, this planet ruin was one of the paths they had to pass through. This was also the biggest reason why planet 7 to 20,003 was so remote. Spaceships from the Imperial Sun planet would not pass through such a dangerous and difficult road unless it was necessary. And the resources invested in cleaning up this star ruin were less than 1/10 of the output. Over time, the planets that lived further away from the Nilra star ruins were abandoned by the Galactic Society and could only enjoy some simple and inclusive products. Li Yueming and the others were currently passing through this area. As the holders of the special recommendation quota, the military committee had the obligation to send them to the Imperial Sun Star. In addition to Li Yueming, Lu Dali, and Fan Li, there were more than 10 young people on the spaceship. They were all young geniuses from other planets who had received special recommendations. At this moment, most of them were sitting quietly in the cabin, watching the scene outside through the thick space glass. Their faces revealed a strong shock. Looking at the scene outside the window, a few young people from small planets clicked their tongues and exclaimed, "Is this the universe?" It was simply too dreamy and unbelievable. One wouldn't know how big the universe was without seeing it with their own eyes. Even the Nilra star ruins before him was nothing more than a speck of dust compared to the boundless universe. But even so, in the eyes of these young people who had been living on the planet's surface, it was already huge enough to make people dumbfounded. Hearing their cries, 3 young men in bright clothes in the cabin revealed a disdainful expression. "Humph! What a bunch of ignorant country bumpkins!" Their voices were not loud, but they were still very ear-piercing in the relatively quiet cabin. The few young men who were mocked turned around with anger on their faces. However, when they saw the clothes on the other party, they seemed to have thought of something and revealed a hint of fear on their faces. In the end, they chose to pretend that nothing had happened. They came from a small planet. And the luxurious clothing that the other party was wearing was obviously from a large planet. If there was a conflict between the two sides, it was very likely that they would be the ones who would suffer in the end. Li Yueming was also looking at the planet and the universe outside through the glass window. However, this was not the first time he had seen such a scene. In the past, he had even tried to cross the starry sky with his own body. Although it ended in failure, he was not a country bumpkin who had never seen the world. The spaceship was traveling very slowly in this area. It took half a month to completely pass through the Nilra star ruins that was filled with planet fragments. The students heaved a sigh of relief when they realized that the distorted and broken planet fragments around them were decreasing. Although Nilra Star Market was able to see the planet fragments at close range, it was still a safe distance. However, this meant that their spaceship was also very close to these fragments. Even though the Military Express was equipped with the A0003 Military Interstellar Artificial Intelligence System that could clearly record the path of the spacecraft, the journey across the star field was still quite risky. This was especially true in a star field that was constantly moving at a high speed. It was an area with high accident rates. Now that they had crossed the most dangerous area, it was no wonder that everyone heaved a sigh of relief. After leaving Nilra Star ruins, the group of students looked back and were surprised to see a huge interstellar fleet slowly sailing on the other side of the deep universe. In the beginning, the students thought that they were hallucinating. However, after repeatedly confirming that there was nothing wrong with their eyes, almost all the students became excited. "That's a military-grade super interstellar warship, right? I've only heard of it in the Universe Infinite radio before. I didn't expect to see it with my own eyes today. This level of military warship isn't going to the battlefield to fight against the Bug Clan Mother Nest. Why would it come to our 26th defense line, a place where birds don't even shit? Who knows? Maybe he's just passing by. No matter what, it feels a little strange. After all, interstellar battleships are all long-distance voyages across the sea of stars. The galaxies are only units of measurement in the middle of the journey. How could they be seen here?" The interstellar warship in the distance was even larger than an ordinary planet. The battleships shone with a white metallic titanium glow. The dozens of fleets that were connected together were like Leviathan in the deep sea, filled with a suffocating pressure. Chapter 795, Interstellar Fleet, Deep Space, _2. This was the first time the students had witnessed such a scene. At this moment, their eyes were wide open as they shouted. Li Yueming didn't feel excited at all. He felt a chill run down his spine. if the conclusion of using infinite deduction at the beginning was not wrong. The 26th defense line would be attacked by the Zergs in 40 years and destroyed. However, the problem was that this place could already be considered the rear of the Alliance of Law. Logically speaking, it should be impossible for the Zergs to bypass the 20-odd defense lines in front of them and arrive here quietly. But the result was that the Bug Clan came. The Bug Clan's mother nest attacked the Emperor Yang star field, and the Bug Clan destroyed everything. Planet 7 to 20,003 didn't survive this disaster. He hadn't considered this aspect before. After all, at that time, his main focus was on how to display his strength to gain attention and obtain various resources to become stronger. But now that he saw these interstellar warships heading towards the Nilra star sector, Li Yueming realized that the Zerg's inexplicable attack was probably not an accident. It was something that attracted it, or rather, attracted the Alliance of Law, at the 26th defense line. The battleship before them was the best proof. The interstellar battleships built by the Alliance of Law were targeted at the mother nest of the insect race. Each of them was priceless. Even if the resources of dozens of small planets were emptied, it would not be enough to build an interstellar battleship. Although these battleships were relatively lightweight among interstellar battleships and could only target level 3 mother nests, they were still the main force of the Alliance of Order in the war against the Zergs. Such a fleet of gold-devouring beasts might not be enough even if they emptied the entire wallet of the Imperial Sun Galaxy. Therefore, their appearance here could only be an order from the Third Universe Military Committee. Then, the problem came. Why did the Third Universe Military Committee send them to the 26th defense line? Li Yueming didn't know. However, he knew that it was definitely not a good thing for the 26th defense line and himself. The interstellar warship did not stay in everyone's sight for too long. In just a few breaths, he started the engine and flew far away. The students lay on the glass of the military express for a long time before reluctantly withdrawing their gazes. After leaving Nilra Star, the military express began to accelerate. The long journey lasted for about a month. When the group of students began to feel anxious, Li Yueming finally saw the outline of the Imperial Sun planet. The Imperial Sun star was known as the Eternal Sun. It was the largest and most prosperous planet in the entire Imperial Sun star area. It was also the economic and political core of the entire Imperial Sun star area. From afar, the space station surrounded by steel and machinery came into view. Some of the more technologically advanced planets didn't have as much trouble to travel to the Imperial Sun star area as they did to small places like this. It would take 1 to 2 months just to get there. There were teleportation facilities between the big planets and the Imperial Sun star. They only needed to pay a fee to use the teleportation facilities to arrive at the Imperial Sun star. The military express didn't need to go through the complicated security checks like the merchants and civilians. They only needed to go through the internal passage of the military committee to enter the Imperial Sun planet. Therefore, Li Yueming and the others did not wait long before they boarded the spaceship and entered the surface of the Imperial Sun star. After traveling for another minute or two, the spaceship stopped in the huge dock. A group of students untied the restraints on their bodies and opened the spaceship under A0003's guidance. Outside the door, there was already a strange man with blue-purple skin and grey eyes waiting for a long time. Seeing the few of them land safely, the strange person spoke in fluent universe language. "Welcome to the Imperial Sun Star, rookies. My name is Andrei Alinov, you can call me Colonel Andrei Alinov." This was the typical characteristic of an alien, and it seemed to have some mixed blood. Although the group of students were curious about his appearance, they did not dare to show it on their faces. They bowed respectfully and said, "Colonel Andrea." "Very good, you're all very energetic." Andrika nodded, his gaze slowly sweeping across the group of people. After a long while, he said, "The military committee has arranged accommodation for you. Now, there are 3 paths in front of you. First, join the military committee directly. If you choose this option, you will receive the rank of a corporal. You will also receive a salary of 100,000 universe credits every month, as well as all kinds of benefits exclusive to the members of the military council. It seemed that their luck was better. Although Andrika wasn't very pretty, his personality was unexpectedly good. He even introduced the 3 options to the students. If they were unlucky and met those bad-tempered instructors, they would just throw the students out of the dock and leave them alone. His first choice was actually the last choice for the students. After all, they had worked so hard to get a special recommendation slot, not to directly join the military committee. Although joining the military committee here would grant one a military rank, and the promotion would be faster than other soldiers without military ranks, other than that, the treatment was no different from Planet 7 to 200,003. At most, they would be able to come from a small planet to a big planet, and the salary and treatment would be slightly better than the original planet. Therefore, as long as there was a choice, the students present would definitely not choose to join the military committee. Andrea obviously knew what they were thinking. In fact, the military council did not want them to go to the battlefield at such a young age, so the latter 2 options were the most important. After a brief explanation, he skipped the first one and continued, "Secondly, you still have about 3 months. The various martial arts schools on the Imperial Sun planet will be recruiting students in these 3 months. You can enter a martial arts school to continue your studies. You can receive a subsidy from the military committee for advanced studies in the martial arts school. It's about 50,000 universe credits per month, and there are a lot of nutrient fluids and supplements. If you can become a 3rd episode martial artist, this subsidy will double. If you can become a level 5 martial artist before graduation, you will be able to obtain the same colonel rank as me when you leave the school gate, and your subsequent promotion will be faster than mine." At this point, Andrei paused for a moment, and his face revealed a hint of envy. In order to obtain the rank of colonel, he had risked his life on the battlefield countless times and paid a great price. However, this group of students only needed to study hard in school and finally get the same or even better treatment as him when they went out. However, he was not jealous. As an ordinary player, he had already given his all to reach this position. However, this group of students was different. They stood on the shoulders of giants, and the responsibilities and dangers they faced were destined to be beyond his reach. Although it was a little unfair. However, in this kind of environment where there were no intact eggs, enjoying more resources also meant that they had to bear more risks, so everything was quite fair. The 3rd option is only open to special geniuses with special talents. You can try your luck at the major commander schools and technological research institutes under the military committee. If it is proved that you have the talent in this field, you can choose to join the unit with the corresponding talent. You can discuss the details with the corresponding person in charge. After reading all 3 options in one breath, Andrika looked at the time and said, "You have half an hour for lunch now. You can slowly consider your next plan during this time. Follow me to visit the military committee's canteen." Chapter 796, The Only Path, 1. The group of students did not say anything and followed behind Andrea quietly. The Interstellar Committee had arranged 3 paths for them. However, in reality, all the students knew that there was only one path that truly belonged to them. That was to enter the Imperial Sun Academy and undergo 5 years of in-depth study. Only in this way could he quickly rise to the top of the military committee. Not only did he enjoy a high social status, but he also had a higher social status compared to the ordinary soldiers who died on the battlefield. They would have more choices. As for the other 2 paths, only those students who had no way out and had not been accepted by the academy for 3 months would consider them. In other words, there was no other way. Therefore, the students would definitely not consider it now. Following Andrea out of the cabin, Li Yueming and the others soon saw more students of their age. They were all young geniuses recommended from the planets around the Imperial Sun galaxy. Of course, the backgrounds of these young geniuses were not much different from theirs. After all, those geniuses from the first-rate planets had already taken the star field teleportation gate to the Imperial Sun Star more than half a month ago. By now, they might have already passed the assessment and entered the academy. The young people were separated by a glass walkway. Although the paths were different, it did not affect them from sizing each other up. All the young people knew very well that they would be rivals in the next 3 months. After all, there was a limited number of places for martial arts high schools in the Emperor Sun Galaxy. Every year, there were about 1 million young geniuses who were selected through the special referees assessment in various star fields, and the number of students who could really be selected to enter the campus did not exceed 2/3. In other words, 1/3 of the students would not be able to enter the academy and would be ruthlessly eliminated. Most of the students who were eliminated would choose to join the Imperial Sun Military Committee and become a basic officer of the interstellar army that guarded the capital. There were also a small number of people who had their Deo hearts shattered during the assessment and chose to return home. Each of them would be the most outstanding young people of their generation in their respective planets, but in the current Emperor Yang star field, they were like carps crossing the river. A casual hit could cause hundreds of geniuses. They were already geniuses that were hard to come by in decades or even centuries on their own planets. In the end, they suddenly became ordinary people in the Emperor Sun Star area. The huge difference was naturally hard to accept. The competition had yet to begin. Just by looking at the students on the other spaceships, the group of students from the Witch star system, like Li Yueming, already felt a huge pressure. Li Yueming, Lu Dali, and Fan Li walked together. They came from Planet 7 to 200,003 together. Although the three of them had fought before boarding the ship, it was still necessary to support each other now that they were in this unfamiliar place. Moreover, the battle before boarding the ship had also confirmed Li Yueming's dominance in this small group. Lu Dali and Fan Li were also very self-aware of him as their leader. This could be considered a tacit understanding among the students who had passed the special referees assessment. They could fight however they wanted on their own planet, but after coming to the Imperial Sun star field, as long as it wasn't for the death of their father, they would put it aside. The most important thing was to take revenge and prevent themselves from being bullied by the geniuses of other planets. They walked through the high-tech corridor for about 5 minutes. During this time, they also went through 3 full-body checkups to prevent certain cosmic infectious diseases and Zerg spies from sneaking in. After everything was over, the cafeteria of the Imperial Sun Military Committee finally appeared in front of Li Yueming and the others. How should he put it? In Li Yueming's previous impression, the canteen was a place where a few aunties waved a ladle and scooped out a spoonful of fat meat while tossing away a few pieces of lean meat. Li Yueming felt that the canteen was more like a huge buffet restaurant. In the middle of the cafeteria was the food area. Students only needed to choose the food they wanted in advance and then they could let the artificial intelligent mechanical maid in the chef's uniform bring the food to the table. All the steps, including cutting, cleaning, and cooking, were fully automated. The food was also categorized in detail according to the tastes of different races and planets. More than 90% of the human race in the universe and 80% of the planet's members could find their favorite hometown dishes in this restaurant. The level of technology behind these details alone was enough for 7 to 20,003 to study for a lifetime. This was the technological barrier. Even if Planet 7 to 20,003 had joined the Star Class Society, even if the Military Council had made all the technology available to the public in the interstellar network, it was still a matter of time. The backward planets would still find it difficult to catch up with the high-level planets. This was not only because of the backward technology, but also because of all kinds of hidden problems, for example, the scarcity of minerals, the unsuitable climate of the star field, and even the different brain circuits of living creatures. These insurmountable barriers were like mountains that pressed down on the technological tree of the backward planets, preventing them from advancing bravely. This was also the reason why the developed planets were particularly developed and the backward planets were particularly backward. Chapter 797, The Only Path, 2. Even if the Alliance of Law had announced all the secrets of science and technology, what those low-intelligence life forms couldn't understand was still impossible to understand. Even if they could understand, they might not be able to obtain results due to a lack of materials or various accidents. After arriving at the cafeteria, Andrika stopped in his tracks and turned his head to look at the group of students who were slightly nervous. He slowly said, "This is the 6th canteen of the military committee. The food inside can be taken according to your needs. I still have to go back and report my work. During this period of time, you can do whatever you want. Remember, you can't waste food in the canteen, you can't make a scene, and you can't fight. However, as long as it doesn't involve life or death, the military committee won't care about what happens after we leave the canteen. Don't blame me for not reminding you beforehand." In the past, there were many students who were sent back because of fighting outside the cafeteria. Andrika's grayish-brown eyes swept across everyone, revealing a rare murderous look. After making sure that all the students behind him had heard him clearly, he continued, "So if you don't want to suffer, don't run around. I don't want to send you back just after I've settled your temporary residence permit." After coming out of the dock, they had been walking along the glass corridor. After 3 rounds of inspection, a group of students from various planets from all over the world gathered in the cafeteria. The military committee's cafeteria was definitely very big. However, it seemed a little crowded as more and more students gathered. There were so many students gathered together, and every one of them was the pride of their respective planets. They were used to watching from the sky. Even if they knew that this was the Emperor Sun Galaxy, it was easy for them to do anything. After hearing Andrea's reminder, the group of students all nodded. The look in their eyes was much more cautious. There was no other way. This was not their small place. Each of the hidden dragons and crouching tigers was not simple. Who knew who was provoking them? He had only been on the Imperial Sun Star for a few hours, and he was already beaten black and blue. It would be difficult for him to go out and meet people for the next period of time. At this moment, Fan Li was very obedient. He followed behind Li Yueming like a lackey. After Andrika left, he whispered, "This place is so high class. I've never been to such a high class place in my life." Li Yueming rolled his eyes at him. Although he had never been to such a high class place before, it was difficult for people to not tear it apart. "Could you not say it out loud? It's very embarrassing, please." Lu Dali humphed and looked around with his bell-like eyes, as if he was considering who could be his opponent. Seeing him looking around, Fan Li was scared out of his wits. He quickly whispered, "Hey, Dali, don't take things too hard here. Tui, it's fine if you take things too hard alone, but don't drag us down with you." Lu Dali retracted his gaze. He looked down obediently and thought, "I've never been to such a place before." Hearing this, it was Fan Li's turn to roll his eyes. All right then. The 3 of them did not come from very wealthy families. They could be considered to be brothers in distress. Without this special recommendation, they probably wouldn't even be able to afford a restaurant that cost 2,000 to 3,000 yuan in their entire lives. Who would have thought that one day, they would be able to appear in the military committee's cafeteria in the capital of the Imperial Sun Star area and have a meal with so many top experts of the younger generation? All right, let's have a meal together. In fact, they were all eating their own food. Their eyes were filled with curiosity and vigilance. Passing through the crowd, Li Yueming and the other 2 ordered what they wanted to eat under the guidance of the A0001 mobile terminal they carried with them. Then, they wanted to find a seat. However, after walking around, they realized that the seats in the canteen were all full. Even if there were 1 or 2 empty seats, it was not enough for the 3 of them. This made the 3 of them a little depressed for a moment. They could only go to the edge and wait for a position. Just as they were about to leave the dining area to line up, they realized that someone was waving at them from a table not far away. Li Yueming and the others were stunned. They looked over and realized that it was their fellow countryman who was on the same speedboat as them. Of course, they were only in the same galaxy. There were 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman. One of the 2 men was called Xiang Jie, and the other was called Sun Yuzong. They were both tall and strong, and they looked very simple and honest. The last girl was called So Keek. She had short, exquisite hair and 2 cute dimples at the corner of her mouth. She sounded fresh and cute when she spoke. The planet they were born on was numbered 7 to 22,413, which was even more backward than planet 7 to 20,003, which was also at the edge of the Witch star system. It was a peripheral planet other than the peripheral planets. Because they were bored during the long-distance flight, they started chatting. The atmosphere of the conversation was quite pleasant, and fortunately, they made a friend halfway. Seeing that Li Yueming and the others had not found a seat to eat, the 3 of them took the initiative to wave for them to come over. After seeing that they were friends, Li Yueming waved his hand and walked through the crowd. Fan Li chuckled, as expected, you still have to rely on your friends when you're outside, at least we don't have to wait outside like idiots. Chapter 798, The Only Path, 3. Lu Dali and Li Yueming did not say anything, but they agreed. She was unfamiliar with outsiders, so she had to be kind to them. As long as it was not a matter of principle, he would endure it as long as he could. After all, taking a step back would open up the world. However, before Li Yueming and the others could get close, 7 to 22,413 behind the 3 people from planet No. 10, 5 other young people were also looking for a place to eat. The 5 young men were all dressed fashionably. They glanced at the petite So Keek, who was sitting in her seat, and then glanced at Xiang Jia and Sun Yuzong, who were dressed in ordinary clothes. After they had a rough idea, they said, "Can we trouble the 3 of you to give us a seat?" Hearing their request, the 3 of them were stunned. There was only 1 empty seat here. They had originally planned to squeeze out 1 seat for Li Yueming and the other 2 so that they could sit down and eat first. But now, there were 5 uninvited guests in front of him. So Coco was the first to recover from her shock. She asked with some doubt, "We only have 1 empty seat here. The 5 of you can't sit, right?" Hearing this, the leader of the 5 suddenly grinned and pointed at the other 4 behind him. "Can't you just vacate your seats?" Of course, this beautiful lady could still sit here and eat. Seeing their fearless faces, he could not help but sigh. Only then did the 3 of them snap back to their senses. It turned out that this group of people was not here to give up their seats politely, but to snatch their seats. Coco's expression changed and she said angrily, "We haven't even eaten yet. Why should we give up our seats to you?" As if he had expected that they would not cooperate so easily, the young man in the lead smiled cheekily and said, "Since you are unwilling, of course, there's no problem." He waved his hand, and the 5 young men behind him immediately walked over. The 3 of them surrounded him from 5 directions. After doing all this, the young man said calmly, "Here, you guys eat first. We'll surround you and reserve your seats in advance." 7 to 22,413 The 3 young people on the planet had never been bullied like this before. Their faces turned green when they heard this. Sun Yuzong stood up and said, "What do you want?" They were not prisoners in prison. What did they think they were? The young man spread his hands and said, "What, you guys aren't willing? If you're not willing, you can also choose to give up your seats to us. That way, it won't be difficult." The other students who were eating around also noticed the abnormality. However, not only did they not try to stop it, but they all looked like they were watching a good show. If it wasn't for the fact that the cafeteria prohibited noise and fighting, someone would probably be booing. The troublemaker was dressed luxuriously and could even take up 5 slots for special recommendations. It was obvious that he came from a medium-sized planet with a deeper foundation. The one being bullied was obviously a small native from the side courtyard. There was a huge gap between the two sides, be it in terms of foundation or strength. It was a pity that they couldn't both suffer. After all, the students present were all competitors. If a few of them could be sent back because of fighting, it would definitely be a good thing for those who stayed. Chapter 799, Conflict 1. In the cafeteria of the military committee, a group of students were waiting for a good show. The staff who maintained order around them were also not used to this. Anyway, students from all over the world came here every year and had conflicts. As long as they did not violate the rules of the canteen, they could not be bothered. So Keek and Sun Yuzong's expressions turned ugly under the watchful eyes of the crowd. At the beginning, they were too angry to react. But now, looking at the other party's unrestrained appearance, their clothes, and the number of people on them, they had already guessed that the other party was very likely a young genius from a medium-sized planet. Under normal circumstances, a small planet like Planet 7 to 20,003 would claim to have 5 special recommendations, but in reality, it was impossible for a small planet to recommend all 5. At least 2 of the recommendations would be rejected by the military committee during the review process. When it was better, it was already good enough for a small planet to send 3 people. For example, So Keek and Sun Yuzong's original planets could only send 2 people most of the time. To be able to send 3 this year was already an extraordinary performance. However, this group of fearless young people was different. Not only were they able to occupy the 5 special recommendation slots, but they also had the guts to cause trouble in the cafeteria. It was obvious that both their planet of origin and their own strength were not simple. If a conflict really occurred, the strength of the 2 sides would not be on the same level at all. The young man and his 4 companions stared at So Keek and the other 2 with half smiles. Obviously, they weren't random bullies. They knew that So Keek and the other 2 came from a small planet and weren't strong enough. No one could support them, so they could only suffer losses. Rubbing his chin, the young man smiled. How is it? Have you considered it? Should he give up his seat or quickly sit down and eat? If you're not convinced, then there's no problem. Let's go to the canteen and practice alone to see whose fist is stronger. So Keek and the other 2's faces turned even uglier. On the planet where they were born, they could be considered as famous geniuses. Usually, who wouldn't be polite to them? Now that he had arrived at the Imperial Sun Star, he finally understood what it meant to feel aggrieved. It was because the planet they were on was quite remote and the resources were very poor. There were not many seniors who could take root in the Imperial Sun Star. Now that they had arrived in the Imperial Sun Star, it was difficult to even find a senior to receive them, let alone a big shot to support them. Moreover, due to the geographical limitations, their own strength was not comparable to the disciples of the noble families. The combination of these 2 factors directly caused the other party to be unrestrained and not put their dignity in their eyes at all. Under the gazes of the surrounding students who were watching a good show, Coco blushed and said, "We found a seat first. We should sit here. Anyway, we won't let you. If you have the guts, chase us away." Hearing her answer, the smile on the young man's face disappeared. They just wanted to find a table to eat. After looking around, they felt that So Coco's table was easier to bully. However, they didn't expect this girl to be so ignorant. Of course, they did not dare to chase them away. After all, they were not arrogant enough to go against the military committee of the Imperial Sun planet. Only the young masters of some planets would have the guts to do so. Although he couldn't chase them away, he still had many ways to discuss them. Seeing that they weren't willing to give up their seats, the young man wasn't in a hurry. He brought a few of his companions and stood nearby, guarding So Keek and the other 2 as if they were criminals. Although So Keek and the other 2 were furious, they could only swallow their anger and accept the outcome. This made the surrounding students who were watching the show a little disappointed. As expected, the students on the small planet did not dare to confront them head-on, causing the conflict to not continue to escalate. If they could be sent back because of the fight, it would be a real family reunion for them. Just as the students were feeling sorry for So Keek, Li Yueming, who came from the other side, brought Lu Dali and Fan Li to So Keek's table. At this moment, So Coco, who had already returned to her seat, also saw their footsteps. She quickly gave them a look, wanting them not to get involved in this farce. However, Li Yueming didn't seem to see it. He walked over and greeted, "We meet again. There's still an empty seat here. Can I sit down?" There were 3 people in So Keek's group, but there were 4 seats. One of them was empty. So Keek had asked Li Yueming to sit in this empty seat. They would give up another seat so that the 4 of them could squeeze together and eat. However, the situation was different now. So Coco and the others could barely keep their 3 spots, let alone leave a spot for Li Yueming. Ben felt that the young man who had lost some face obviously couldn't let Li Yueming come up again. Just as Li Yueming walked through the crowd to an empty chair and was about to sit down, the young man reached out and stopped him. He frowned and said, "Are you deaf or blind? Didn't you hear that these seats have been reserved by us brothers?" Chapter 800, Conflict 2. The expressions of the 4 young men around him were also very bad. So Coco and the other 2 had rejected him. After all, they were the ones in the wrong. But now, these 3 were obviously trash natives from a small planet. Therefore, the few of them looked at Li Yueming with anger. They were obviously angered by his blind behavior. Li Yueming did not panic at all. He smiled and said, "I only know that the seat belongs to the person whose butt is sitting on the stool. If the butt is not sitting on the stool, it can still be reserved. Is there such a rule in the military committee's canteen?" Lu Dali had been chatting with Sun Yuzong and the Xiong family on the spaceship. Now that he saw the young geniuses from the big planet bullying them, he said with a ruthless expression, "You ignorant fellows, get lost." He was tall and strong, and he was the kind that exuded a domineering aura. At this moment, he stood in the crowd like a lump of iron. His temperament was definitely not to be trifled with. The young people from the 5 medium-sized planets on the opposite side clearly felt that the 3 of them were not to be trifled with. However, with so many people watching, if they admitted defeat like this, they would probably become the laughing stock of the students for a long time. Therefore, he could only refuse to be outdone. "We're from the 3rd transit planet of Turing. If you really have the ability to make a fuss, then go out and fight." The 3rd transit planet was considered a relatively well-known medium-sized planet. It was one of the important transit planets in the Tuliang star field. Every day, countless interstellar spaceships would pass by the planet, bringing a huge tax and sufficient resources to the planet. To be able to stand out from such a rich medium-sized planet, the strength of these young people in front of him was definitely not to be underestimated. Although Lu Dali was a little hesitant, he couldn't lose face. Seeing that the 2 of them were about to go out of the cafeteria to have an intense PK, the students who had been prepared to give up on watching could not help but have their eyes light up again. However, Li Yueming obviously didn't want them to disturb his appetite. Moreover, the opponents were not simple. If Lu Dali really accepted the challenge, he might suffer. Therefore, he directly sat down on the originally empty chair and said slowly, "I've already sat down. If you still don't give up, you can try to chase me away." This move of his was very crafty. The key was that the speed just now was simply unbelievable. The young man's attention had always been on Li Yueming. Even when Lu Dali had a conflict with his companions, his gaze never left Li Yueming. He had no choice because his intuition was like an alarm that could explode at any time. Every inch of his muscles was telling him that he could not leave Li Yueming. Once he left, a huge crisis might happen in an instant. Even so, he did not even see Li Yueming's shadow at that moment. He only felt a blur in front of him, and then Li Yueming's figure had already appeared on the stool behind him. If it was on the battlefield, wouldn't this instant be enough for Li Yueming to easily circle behind him and stab him? The young man couldn't be 100% sure. However, the cold sweat on his back had unknowingly drenched his clothes. The other 4 students were also stunned. They looked at Li Yueming, who was still in a good mood, and then at the young man with a pale face. They asked curiously, "What happened?" The young man swallowed a mouthful of saliva. After a while, he said, "Let's go." The other companions were a little confused. However, looking at the young man's pale face, he could only nod his head gloomily. Before he left, he did not forget to say some harsh words. "Humph, you guys are lucky today. Pray that we won't see you again." Originally, it was just a habit of uttering harsh words. Li Yueming and the others didn't say anything. The young man almost staggered and fell to the ground. He hurriedly pulled his companions and fled. Because the reversal was too sudden, the surrounding students were all stunned. Even Coco and the others couldn't help but open their mouths wide. They looked at Li Yueming in disbelief. It should be known that because of the vision, they had all witnessed it with their own eyes. Li Yueming was almost blurred into a bolt of lightning at that moment. In an instant, he bypassed the young man and sat down in the cafeteria's seat in an elegant manner. The entire process was done in one go, without the slightest bit of water. It was as beautiful as art. After a long while, Coco came back to her senses. Her eyes lit up as she said, "I couldn't tell. You're too amazing." Li Yueming smiled but didn't say anything. The reason why he was so ostentatious in front of everyone was that he did not hide his strength at all. Other than helping Coco and the others out of their predicament, the main reason was that he wanted to declare his fist to everyone. After all, if the adults of this world were respected by strength, then the young people were respected by talent and potential. Now that he had arrived at the Imperial Sun Star, there were as many geniuses as dogs and experts everywhere. In this place, there was no need to keep a low profile. No one would investigate whether you had enough inner qualities to pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger. Instead, they would directly treat you as a pig. If he was a genius, he would display it wantonly. "I'm not afraid that your talent is not high enough, but I'm afraid that your skills are not good enough and you can only be sent home." So Coco's big eyes were about to shine. She stared at Li Yueming and kept hitting him. It was as if she had gotten to know him all over again. After all, although the few of them had a good time chatting on the spaceship, they were still very happy. However, they did not fully understand each other's strength. They thought that Li Yueming was just like them, coming to the Imperial Sun Star to try his luck. He didn't expect Li Yueming to be so strong. He was actually able to scare a few geniuses from medium-sized planets into not daring to even fart with just a look and a movement. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, they even lost their face and could only run away dejectedly. Fan Li, who was following at the back, also felt honored at this moment. He happily replied, "Of course, my big brother's strength is not just for show." The score of the Special Recommendation Assessment this time directly broke the record of our planet 7 to 20,003 for hundreds of years. Hearing his words, even Xiangjia and Sun Yuzong, 2 honest people, were curious. "So, how many points did Big Brother Li get this time?" Sun Yuzong asked with his eyes wide open. 350 points. The military committee of the entire Third Universe had a fixed assessment for special referees, so the score could be used as a standard for the entire universe. At this moment, Sun Yuzong had increased the score to 350 points. This was already the highest score for the special recommendation assessment on their planet in the past. However, Fan Li shook his head. Even Dolly has more than 330 points. How can Li Yueming only have more than 350 points? Sun Yuzong and Xiangjia both gasped when they heard the answer. It was more than 350 points. That's 360 to 370 points? This score could be considered outstanding on some large planets, right? Indeed, one could not judge a book by its cover, and the sea could not be measured. He did not expect that the harmless Li Yueming was the most hidden genius of the Witch Star field. The few of them chatted. The biointelligent robot had already delivered their lunch. Because there were only 4 seats, it was impossible for all 6 of them to have seats. However, it was not a big problem to squeeze together and eat together. While eating, Coco said gratefully, "I really have to thank you for this. Those guys on the 3rd transit planet of Turing don't even put us in their eyes." Lu Dali waved his hand and smiled. "Besides, if you didn't give up a seat, we would still be waiting for others to finish eating before we can find a seat." The few of them chatted happily. However, what they did not know was that an invisible camera not far from them had recorded the conflict just now and sent this information to the core area of the Imperial Sun Military Committee.